26 children buried alive, one of the largest kidnappings in U.S. history. How in the world did a school bus full of children simply disappear? It's summer school Thursday, July 1976. James Schoenfeld, his brother Richard, and Frederick Newell Woods IV watch a school bus load up with children. The three men all come from wealthy families, but in their early to mid-20s, the men have already made a plethora of bad decisions. Now, they're hurting for cash and they need to make a big score fast. The brothers, James and Richard, have already been convicted of grand theft auto, but given their age and family connections, the judge sentenced them to probation. These weren't violent offenders, their high-priced lawyer had pleaded. They were just dumb kids who made a dumb choice. They'd never again pose a threat to the community. The judge believed it, and 26 children would pay the price for it. The three men knew well the route the bus was going to take. The bus, being driven by Frank Edward Ray, also known affectionately as Ed by the local community, is preparing to bring the kids back home from a summer class trip to the local fairgrounds. The kids had spent the day swimming in the fairground pool and enjoying a very rare summer school field trip. The bus is cruising down a lonely back road. There's barely any traffic here, and that's exactly what the kidnappers are counting on. They've already raced well ahead of the bus and are now prepared, waiting with the van just off the shoulder of the road. As the bus approaches, the van pulls out, completely blocking the road. Ed honks the bus's horn and he slows to a stop. He can't imagine what kind of idiot would just pull off the shoulder and block the road like that. He quickly glances back at the kids to make sure they're okay, and when he looks back out the bus window, he's shocked by what he sees. Three men have exited the van, nylon stockings over their heads making their faces hard to see. The men have guns, which they're pointing directly at Ed. One of the men warns him not to throw the bus into reverse or make any dumb moves, as he signals for him to open the bus's door. Ed hesitates. If he lets the armed man onto the bus, there's no telling what might happen to the children. Then again, the men could simply shoot him through the glass windows and force their way on anyway. There's no way to lock the bus door, and even if there was, an emergency door in the back of the bus would make it easy to get inside anyways. Ed decides it's better to simply cooperate and says a quick prayer as he opens the bus door. One of the masked men immediately climbs aboard. The children begin to scream in fear as they see the man with a shotgun climb onto the bus, but the man shouts at them and threatens them into silence. There's a few scattered whimpers from the children, but they comply. The man then tells them to put their heads down and keep them down. To Ed, he tells him to get off the driver's seat and sit down in one of the empty seats at the head of the rows of seats. The masked man sits across from Ed, pointing his gun at him the whole time. A second masked man climbs onto the bus and sits in the driver's seat. Outside, the third kidnapper hops into the van and puts it in gear, then moves it out of the way of the bus. The whole operation has gone smoothly up until now. No cars have driven by to catch them in the act, and the kidnapping has taken less than a minute. The man in the driver's seat puts his foot on the gas and the bus lurches forward, with the van falling in behind it. The man sitting across from Ed draws his attention once more to the gun. No hero stuff, he warns him. Just sit there quietly and everything will be fine. He repeats that last part once more out loud to the children. They're too scared to even look up. The bus takes a right off the paved road and onto a disused road. It bounces wildly as the driver accelerates, anxious to leave the paved road behind and get the bus deep into the wilderness and away from prying eyes. Finally, the bus arrives at the Baranda Slough, a shallow branch of California's Chowchilla River. The driver pulls the bus into the surrounding foliage as deep as he can, doing an adequate job of hiding the large school bus from view. As the van pulls up behind the bus, the men signal at the children to get up and start unloading off the bus in a single file line. Ed is forced to go first, the masked gunman never taking his eyes off the aging bus driver. Outside, the driver of the first van uncovers a second van that's been hidden nearby in the brush. Both vans have had their rear windows painted black, and the interiors are reinforced with paneling. The children and Ed are split into two groups and ushered into the two vans. Once loaded, the doors in the vans are slammed shut. There's no light in the vans, and the blacked-out windows keeps even the fading sunlight outside from getting in. Children whimper in fear in the darkness. Some cry. Ed does his best to reassure the children, but his words fall on deaf ears. The vans start moving. Eventually, Ed can feel the vans leave the gravel road behind and land on smooth pavement. The vans don't stop again, they just keep going well into the night. The lack of circulation makes the van stuffy, and despite it being nighttime now, the California weather is still warm. The children haven't eaten or drank anything in almost 12 hours, and heat stroke is a very serious concern in the blacked-out vans. But the kidnappers keep on driving. Ed tries to keep track of time, but it's impossible. He has no idea. By the time the van has finally come to a stop, it's been almost 12 hours. The doors to one of the vans open up, and Ed is greeted once more by a man wielding a sawed-off shotgun. He's told to get out and follow, and the doors are slammed shut as he exits the van. A few feet away, Ed is led into a dark hole in the ground with a ladder sticking out of it. He's told to climb down, but Ed hesitates. He has no idea what's down there. There's no light, but the shotgun pressing against his back encourages him to move. Reluctantly, he climbs up onto the ladder and then makes his way down into the dark. To Ed's relief, there's a small flickering light once he reaches the bottom. As his eyes adjust, he can look around and realizes he's inside a truck trailer that's been buried 12 feet into the ground. Above him is a hole the kidnappers cut in the roof, and as he looks around, he spots a table at the head of the trailer. On the table are some jugs of water and some food, a few boxes of cereal, peanut butter, and several loaves of bread, as well as some other odds and ends. Seeing the water and food, Ed finally realizes they've been kidnapped. That's actually a relief. For half a day now, Ed's been wondering if he and the children were simply going to be killed. One by one, the children are brought out of the van. As the kidnappers drag one child out of the van, they slam the door shut again, then lead the child to the hole in the ground and tell them to climb. Down in the buried trailer, Ed does his best to encourage the children, not wanting the kidnappers to lose their patience and hurt one of them, or worse. Some of the children try to hide all the way to the back of the vans, away from the doors, but it's no use. The kidnappers simply climb into the vehicles and angrily drag the children out, then push them toward the hole. Consigning themselves to their fate, the last of the children finally climbs down the stairs and into the trailer. Suddenly, the kidnappers toss a roll of toilet paper down into the hole and say, "We'll be back for you." Then the children can hear the sound of something heavy being dragged. To their horror, they realize the kidnappers are dragging a large manhole cover over the hole leading to the outside world. Ed and 26 children have been buried alive. The only sound is the whirring of fans in the trailer, which is another bit of good news for Ed. This means the kidnappers have at least thought of the possibility of asphyxiation and installed some sort of ventilation system. Where the wheel wells of the trailer are, the kidnappers have cut holes, clearly intending for those to serve as makeshift bathrooms. Ed and one of the older boys stick their heads into the holes, hoping to see a way to escape their predicament, but the holes only lead to a small depression in the soil around the trailer, enough to serve as a toilet and nothing more. Pushing on the rear door of the trailer, they realize their worst fears. They're fully and completely buried alive, and the only way out is through the hole in the ceiling that's now been completely covered up. Frederick Woods and brothers James and Richard Schoenfeld finally can breathe a sigh of relief. The three kidnappers have driven the children to Woods' family quarry, where before the kidnapping they had buried a full-size truck trailer. For several days, the men had worked to secure the trailer and install a makeshift ventilation system. The trailer was all but impossible to find unless you knew where to look, and the quarry was remote enough, half a day's drive away from the kidnapping site. The men are confident they've pulled off as nearly a perfect crime as possible. The only thing left to do is phone in their demands. They dial the number to the Chowchilla Police Department and are met with a busy signal. The men dial again and once more receive a busy signal. They wait a few minutes and yet again another busy signal. Woods and the Schoenfeld brothers realize they can't get through to the police department to place their ransom demands, figuring that the police are probably extremely busy as news of the kidnapping has spread. They have no idea just how right they are, as distraught parents and national media tie up every line to the small police department. The kidnappers try again and again but fail to get through each time. Finally, they give up. They've been driving for half a day and were up long before that. The men are exhausted, and with the children securely under 12 feet of dirt, the three kidnappers decide to get some rest. The police, meanwhile, have already found the abandoned school bus and can tell by tire tracks on the scene that two other vehicles had departed the scene. For the terrified parents, this is mixed news. On one hand, their children are still missing. On the other, there is every indication that the children are still alive. Police try to reassure the parents, telling them that this has likely become a kidnapping. They should be receiving a ransom demand soon, and that means a chance to bring the children back home alive. The Chowchilla police chief, overwhelmed and out of his depth, places a call to the governor and requests help. Within an hour, 30 FBI agents have arrived and the hunt for the kidnappers is on. But for the children who've been buried alive, things are very quickly becoming lethal. They've been underground for half a day now. The food and water have run out and the temperature inside the buried trailer is sweltering. Then suddenly one of the two fans pumping fresh air into the trailer dies. Ed and the oldest boy, 14-year-old Mike Marshall, are only too aware of what'll happen if the second fan fails. But they don't tell the rest of the children to keep them from panicking. Then, just a few minutes later, the second fan fails. There's no more fresh air being pumped into the buried trailer. But there was still room for things to get worse. The roof of the trailer has been reinforced with metal wire, but has long ago started to fail. The roof is now buckling from the weight of the soil on top of it. Each torturous scream of metal sets the children into crying fits as dust rains down on them. Ed does his best to keep the children calm, knowing that their hysterics are sucking up precious oxygen. The kidnapper said they'd be back for them. But with the fans out and the roof caving in, Ed knows that escape is the only option. Even if the kidnappers return when they discover the collapsing roof and failed ventilation system, it's unlikely they'll have a backup plan for keeping Ed and all 26 children hidden from the authorities. That means only two things: either they'll let them go, or more likely simply kill them all to avoid being caught. Ed hatches a plan. He enlists the aid of 14-year-old Mike and begins to stack the old mattresses left inside the trailer on top of each other. Eventually, they manage to create a high enough stack that Ed and Mike can reach the hole at the top of the trailer. But there isn't enough room for both to push on the heavy manhole cover blocking their escape route, so Ed and Mike must take turns pushing on the lid. Ed and Mike both know that they're fighting to survive a triple threat. That oxygen will soon run out, asphyxiating all of the children. The roof will cave in at any moment, burying all of them in thousands of pounds of dirt. And once the kidnappers return to discover their hiding hole for the children is compromised, they'll likely kill all of them in order to avoid being discovered. Mike pushes against the manhole cover, with all of his strength, fighting for all 27 lives buried in the trailer. Suddenly, the cover shifts a bit. Mike pushes even harder, widening a tiny little gap. The children below explode into cheers, but the manhole cover is barely nudging. Mike sticks a hand through the small opening he's created and feels around on top of the cover. He realizes that the kidnappers have stuck 2 heavy truck batteries on top of the cover. He works at the batteries for minutes, nudging them inch by inch and sliding them toward the edge of the manhole cover. Finally, he's pushed them off and the cover becomes much easier to slide out of the way. Then, Mike discovers they're a far cry from freedom. Expecting to see a night sky above, Mike realizes that the kidnappers have built a wooden box around the entrance to the buried trailer. The box is just large enough for Mike to pull himself up into, far too small for Ed to help. If they're all going to survive, it's up to Mike now. Mike begins pounding on the walls of the box. He's terrified that he'll break through only to discover the kidnappers outside waiting with guns. But he knows if they stay in the trailer, they're as good as dead anyway. So he continues pounding on the wooden sides. Finally, he manages to crack the tough wood, finding dirt past it. The box itself has also been buried, and Mike rips the wood away and starts digging through the soil. The going is tough at first, but as he pushes through into looser soil, Mike knows he's near freedom. Then, suddenly, he bursts out of the ground and into daylight. Blinking against the sun, Mike quickly scans the surroundings, expecting to see the kidnappers rushing at him, but there's nobody around. Instead, he sees hills and large trees, and as he pulls himself out of the hole, he realizes he's on top of a massive sand dune. The buried trailer is perfectly camouflaged. There's no chance anybody would have found them if they stayed put. One by one, the children climb out of their would-be tomb and greedily suck up the fresh air. By the time the group is out, it's already 8 p.m. Ed and the children have been buried alive for nearly 16 hours. Off in the distance, they hear the sounds of heavy equipment and machinery, and the children become fearful. What if it's the kidnappers? But Ed knows they have no other choice. They have to find someone that can help them. The group makes its way toward the sounds of machinery, and they spot a large group of men operating heavy equipment. Ed and the 26 children rush out of the tree line to the absolute amazement of the working men. They did it against all odds. They found their way to freedom. The children had been buried 100 miles from their kidnapping site, and as Frederick Newhall Woods IV and James and Richard Schoenfeld woke up from their exhausted sleep, they would turn on the news to discover the group had set themselves free and been rescued. It wouldn't take long for the police to narrow in on Woods, and after executing a search warrant on Woods' father's estate, they found a draft of the ransom note and one of the guns used in the kidnapping. The 3 kidnappers had already fled, but Woods would eventually be caught 2 weeks later in Vancouver, Canada. James Schoenfeld was captured on the very same day in Menlo Park, California, while Richard Schoenfeld had turned himself in voluntarily 6 days prior. The 3 men were given life in prison with a possibility of parole. Richard Schoenfeld was paroled in 2012 at the age of 77. His brother James was paroled 3 years later, aged 82. Frederick Woods, wealthy heir to a fortune estimated at $100 million, would be denied parole 19 times, and if he lives to see it, his next hearing will be in 2024. Canada has long been haunted by the mysterious murder of billionaire Barry Sherman. Some argue the Toronto police were overwhelmed or stretched too thin. There were dozens of homicides they needed to solve, and a serial killer to stop before he killed again. It is possible under these circumstances that corners were cut and evidence overlooked or missing. This is certainly the opinion of Sherman's family's private investigation team. Police error may have cheated the victims of justice and the family from a sense of closure. Let's see who could have murdered murdered Barry Sherman and his wife, and why? In this episode of the Infographics Show, the mystery of the murder of billionaire Barry Sherman. 50 Old Colony Road in Toronto, Canada is now the scene of a crime. But once not so long ago, it was just another home. Though, to be fair, it was far from your average type of house. Rather, it was a 5-bedroom, 9-bathroom mansion of concrete and steel, sprawled out over more than 12,000 square feet. It had an indoor and outdoor hot tubs and pools, a sauna and tennis court, an outdoor kitchen area, and an underground 6-car parking lot. The Shermans had spent 20 years as residents of Old Colony Road. However, by 2017, they had decided to move closer to the city, in an elite neighborhood. They purchased new property in Forest Hill and demolished its original house. Honey Sherman then began to plan the custom-designed home of her dreams to take its place. On December 13, 2017, the Shermans met with architects to discuss these plans. When the meeting ended, Honey left, but Barry stayed behind for 2 more hours. Estimates are that while Honey made it home by 7, Barry arrived closer to 9. Whatever time it was that they made it inside, they would never make it out alive again. 2 days later, on December 15th, a real estate agent stopped by. With him were wealthy clients interested in buying the $6.7 million Sherman home. They began a tour of the property, starting on the main floor and then making their way upstairs. They then headed back down, but before they left, they stopped briefly at the basement area pool. The pool wasn't really a point of interest, so they didn't stick around for long. But everyone was puzzled by what appeared to be bodies sitting by its steps. The real estate agent later explained that he didn't understand what he really saw. He thought it was some kind of strange rich person joke or something left over from Halloween. He never, in a million years, thought that he had stumbled across real bodies or was one of the first at a crime scene. It wasn't until later, after they left, that someone dialed 911. Both Barry and Honey were half-seated with belts around their necks. They were partially suspended as the other end of the belts were attached to a 3.5-foot pool rail. Both were fully clothed with their backs toward the pool. Their winter coats had been pulled from their shoulders to hold their arms in place behind them. Honey, an athletic 70-year-old with a signature blonde bob, appeared to have been hit and was slumped to one side. Oddly, Barry, who was 75 and heavy-set with graying hair and glasses, was positioned with his legs stretched out in front and crossed at the ankles. Word of the couple's death spread quickly in Canada and beyond. The Shermans had been married 40 years and had made a large impact not only in Canada, but around the world during this time. Barry's fortune amounted to $3.6 billion, but it was not their wealth that set the Shermans apart. It was their generosity with their money and their support for countless charities and other well-intentioned organizations. For these reasons and more, what took place next was an injustice for both the victims as well as their friends and family. The police who saw the bodies misread several obvious clues, and without taking into account either the character of histories of those involved, came to a quick, inaccurate, and outrageous conclusion. In a speech to reporters outside the home, they said that there were no signs of forced entry. They then added that they were not actively looking for any suspects. To those who know anything about murder investigations, this disclosure meant just one thing. The next day, the media, based on the police's report, began reporting the crime as a murder-suicide. They alleged that Honey had been killed by her husband Barry before he then killed himself. The couple's 4 children were enraged, with good reason. Still mourning their loss, they now found it necessary to release a statement defending the characters of their parents. Even those who didn't particularly like Barry agreed that the thought of him as a murderer was absurd. For one, the couple got along well, and Barry had never before in his life been violent. He was also not in the best physical shape and had limited strength. It was Honey who was athletic and by comparison much stronger. Some friends pointed out with rather dark humor that if it was a murder-suicide, Barry would not have been the aggressor, but more likely the victim. Having lost faith in the police, the Sherman children took action. They hired their own set of private investigators and paid another pathologist for a second autopsy. All came to the conclusion that the police had failed to notice several things. This included something as incredible as impressions of ties left on Barry's and Honey's wrists, indicating that they both, not just Honey, had been restrained. In addition to this, experts found other clues to prove Barry's innocence. The length of belt Barry was hanging from prevented him from getting the leverage necessary to have killed himself. He also had not moved around violently, as those trying to hang themselves would do. Unlike Barry, victims of suicide are not typically found with their glasses still on straight or their legs folded neatly in front of them. Eventually, the police agreed, but it took them over a month to change their opinion. Reports at this time reflected this change and began to report the crime as a targeted double homicide. As the police investigation went went on, the Sherman children, for obvious reasons, continued with their own at the same time. It was not long before their private investigators found yet further task force shortcomings. They had not vacuumed around the bodies to collect fibers or hairs that the assailant may have left behind. They did not fingerprint anyone present in the house at the time to help identify a possible culprit. They even failed to examine the home for a point of entry beyond an absence of broken locks or windows. There were as many as 9 ways to enter, as well as a lockbox with a key left outside for the real estate agent. Then there were the dozens of apparently unnoticed palm and fingerprints left at the scene. With so much forensic evidence overlooked or lost, the case dragged on and eventually grew cold. By fall of the year that followed, only one officer was still investigating it full-time. It didn't help that though 2017 had been a bit crazy, 2018 was crazier still. There were a record number of homicides that year, and the officer's attention had by necessity turned elsewhere. Many looked to motive in an attempt to make headway with the case. But just who would want to kill Barry and his wife? As previously mentioned, both were generous participants in society and gave multiple millions to various organizations and charities. However, they were not without their enemies. In fact, Barry, an aggressive businessman in the pharmaceutical field, had many. Barry made his fortune in the genetic drug business, but his career started out small. He first worked for Empire Laboratories, a company owned by his uncle, as a driver during his summers. He was finishing his PhD in engineering when his uncle later died. He then bought Empire Laboratories and ran it for a few years before he sold it to a buyer. The money from the sale was used to create Apotex, a business of his own. Through hard work and determination, Barry turned it into a lucrative multi-billion-dollar company, and in the process earned himself a fortune. He had 10,000 employees who many said he treated more like family than staff. In fact, he would cut checks out to a total of millions for those who came to him with their problems. But that's pretty much where the good feelings surrounding his company end. Unfortunately, by nature of his business, providing cheaper alternatives to name brands had made him several ambitious and well-funded enemies. The drug companies whose medications Barry copied lost billions as he sold knockoffs based on theirs. Needless to say, they did not take this well, and occasionally things got ugly. Bayer AG, for example, at one point believed that Apotex was in violation of its protective patents. It's alleged that those working on behalf of the Bayer company tried to get Apotex employees to reveal inside information. There were even accusations that Bayer had considered planting some drugs in Barry's car. Unsurprisingly, true or not, the company claimed to have no knowledge of any of this. Barry had quite a few questionable connections from other business dealings as well. An example of this was an investment he had made in a conman's chartering company that, it turned out, had no yachts. Another was a nutritional supplement that he had backed that was thought up and pitched by a 2-time felon. Then there was an online trivia game that led to Barry pressing charges when his investments went missing. Overall, Barry was quite open-minded and gave support to those who most others wouldn't. Whether this was actually a good thing or not is still a source of debate. His friends believe that by seeing the good in sketchy people, he may have also unnecessarily put himself in danger. All the same, while he could be trusting and kind, Barry could be shrewd and spiteful as well. While he was often in court fighting for the rights to create drugs, he also fought for things that were unnecessary and even unethical. For example, he battled a hematologist in court who rightly questioned the safety of an Apotex medication. In the process, Barry involved her school, and she lost her position as a clinical program director at the university. However, in a rather hollow victory, she won the case. Aside from tumultuous business relations, there was bad blood in Barry's family as well, specifically in the case of his uncle's children. As he had been known to do, he had been providing checks to help out more than one. However, they wanted more, possibly because he had at least one nephew and niece addicted to drugs. They joined in the suit against him, alleging that because he created Apotex with money from their father's company, that they were owed some of its profits. Litigation drew out for a decade before they finally lost. Animosity and resentment only grew once a verdict was reached. After all, the nephews and nieces had been ordered to pay Barry's legal expenses. Very soon after this, the Shermans were strangled in their home. Was this merely a coincidence, or could his own family have killed him for revenge? Whether they did or not, they will continue to suffer the consequences of their betrayal. Barry's lawyers filed an appeal requesting they pay more money than what they already owed, the same day he was buried. While there's a lot of speculation about just who killed Barry and his wife, there's even more about what will happen following their death. Currently, Barry's wills are sealed by the order of the Ontario Superior Court. In the interests of protecting their beneficiaries, their contents will remain undisclosed for 2 years. No one, including the Sherman estate lawyer, knows the specifics of what either contains. Shockingly, it is possible that Honey never made a will. No one was asked to hold one on her behalf, and nothing turned up during a property search. This complicates matters somewhat, as order of death is important. One possibility is that they were killed together, or in legal terms, that they died simultaneously, or when Honey returned home before her husband, that she was killed first. Then again, there is no way to prove that Barry was not the first one strangled. Reports claim that the exact time of death cannot be determined, and therefore, it will remain a mystery if one outlived the other. If Honey was the first to die, Barry's will could divide the estate between their kids. However, on the event that Barry died before his wife, his estate could be left to her. If she was then killed without a will of her own, who knows what this would mean? But whatever does happen, it's bound to get nasty. Sources allege someone has already stepped forward not long after Honey's death, saying she was promised them money. Though Barry and Honey were generous with money, Barry, and by extension his wife, also had many well-known enemies. There's nothing like checking into a hotel. You can kick back, relax, and let others take care of everything. Just don't go nuts at the minibar. Those little bags of pretzels add up. But when you check into a hotel, above all, you're trusting the hotel to provide safety and security. Your room is your sanctuary. This made it all the stranger when a man was murdered in the safety of his hotel room in the middle of one of America's oldest and most prestigious hotels. The year was 1935 in Kansas City, Missouri, and the hotel president was one of the crown jewels of the city's Power and Lights district. Less than 10 years earlier, it had even hosted the Republican National Convention, nominating Herbert Hoover for president. The hotel was best known for its Drum Room Lounge, which hosted legendary entertainers including Old Blue Eyes Frank Sinatra. Anyone who was anyone in Kansas City knew that the hotel president was the place to go people watching. Their most infamous guest, however, was still to come. Roland T. Owen was an unassuming man walking into the hotel president and asking for an interior room on the upper floors on January 2nd. He claimed to be from Los Angeles, and those who saw him during his stay at the hotel mostly remembered him for a nasty scar he had on his temple and a deformed ear. That led many people to assume he was a professional boxer. An odd, quiet man, he talked to the bellhop Randolph Probst on the way to his room 1046 and claimed to have just been staying at another hotel but wanted a cheaper one. But Probst noticed something odd. For a man who had been traveling, Roland T. Owen barely had any baggage, just a hairbrush, a comb, and toothpaste in his pocket, and no suitcases to be seen. Mr. Owen was a mysterious guest, but a bigger mystery was about to put the hotel president in the history books. Mr. Owen continued to puzzle the workers at the hotel as he stayed there for 2 days. Maid Mary Soptic was shocked when she entered the dark room and found Owen sitting there in the dark with the shades closed and only a dim lamp on. He told her to go ahead and clean, but something felt odd to her about the room. No one ever saw Owen turn the lights on in his room, and he always seemed nervous. He left and asked her to leave the room unlocked as if he was waiting for someone. Roland Owen stayed at the hotel for 2 days, and the first night was when things started to get really eerie. When Mary returned, she found Owen lying on his bed fully dressed, and he had left a note on the bedside addressed to someone named Dawn. It read, "Dawn, I'll be back in 15 minutes. Wait." But no one had ever seen anyone else enter the room. Whoever Dawn was, Owen seemed to communicate with him more than any of the guests or staff. Mary Soptic reported many strange things, like the fact that Owen's room was locked from the outside at one point, but the door could only be locked from the inside. When she entered, she heard the phone ring, and Owen said, "No, Dawn, I don't want to eat. I'm not hungry. I just had breakfast." "No, I'm not hungry." Owen seemed to be planning on a long-term stay, asking Soptic about the president's residential rates, but his stay would be a lot shorter than anyone expected. When Soptic returned to furnish Owen's room at 4 p.m. on the second day, she heard 2 men talking inside. When she knocked, she heard a deep voice speaking, definitely not Owen's. She asked if they needed towels, and the mysterious man said they didn't, but she knew there were no towels in that room. Jean Owen, who was staying in the room next door, said she heard many people talking in room 1046, shouting and cursing, and as the night went on, the behavior around the hotel only got stranger. A woman believed to be a prostitute wandered the halls looking for her client. She expected him in Owen's room but came out empty. Outside, a city worker observed a man wearing only an undershirt, pants, and shoes run into the street looking distressed. He was ranting, saying he would kill someone and looked wounded. Whether he was related to the mysterious goings-on in room 1046, no one was able to answer, but he disappeared into a taxi and was never seen again. The next morning, everyone would be looking for answers. It was an ordinary day on January 4th when Della Ferguson came on shift as the switchboard operator at the hotel President. She made her planned wake-up call to room 1046 when she noticed that the phone had been taken off the hook. She contacted Rudolph Probst to check on the room, and he found the door locked with a Do Not Disturb sign on it. When he called out, a voice inside told him to enter, but the door was still locked and no one was letting him in. He yelled to hang up the phone and left. Another bellboy, Harold Pike, had a key and let himself in after the phone wasn't hung up. He found Owen alone in the dark, naked and unresponsive. There was no sign of anyone else, and Pike put the phone on the hook and left. It was only 2 hours before the phone was off the hook again, and when Probst entered the room, he found something very different in the isolated, locked room. Owen was on the floor, on his hands and knees, and his head was bloody. More disturbing, there was blood all over the walls and on the bed and in the bathroom. Probst ran downstairs to get help, but when he returned, the door was blocked. Owen had fallen in front of it, barring entry with his body. They talked to the wounded man, and he eventually forced his way up and let them in. Doctors were called to examine him, and what they found was terrifying and impossible to explain. Owen had been tied with cord around his neck, wrists, and ankles. His neck showed signs of strangulation, and he had been stabbed multiple times in the chest. He had a nasty skull fracture from blows to the head, with the damage being so serious that blood splatters could be found on the ceiling. When Dr. Harold Flanders, a local doctor, asked him what happened, Owen insisted that he had fallen in the bathtub. When he was asked who hurt him, he said nobody. His injuries were serious and he was rushed to the hospital, but the mysterious Roland T. Owen would not be giving away any more of his secrets. By the time they arrived at Kansas City General Hospital, he had slipped into a coma and died soon after. No one had seen anyone enter the room that morning. There was no sign of a struggle in the room. Owen had been alive, if drunk, when Probst had entered the room. How did he get brutally murdered in a locked hotel room? That's what the Kansas City Police Department wanted to find out. Jean Owen was briefly detained and interviewed, but when her boyfriend backed up her story, she was released. An autopsy of Owen revealed that he had been fatally stabbed and bludgeoned. But one of the oddest things was that he had apparently been wounded between 4 a.m. and 5 a.m. based on the dried blood. That meant Owen had already been dying when Pike entered his room and found him lying in bed. A thorough search of the room found a few articles belonging to Owen, but they also found no evidence of the knife used to kill him. That ruled out suicide. But other odd items were found in the room, including a bottle of diluted sulfuric acid and a clothing tag from New Jersey. The crime scene team looked for fingerprints and found a set belonging to a woman that didn't match anyone at the hotel. Was this mysterious visitor the one who spelled the end for Roland T. Owen? The murder was front-page news, and detectives soon believed that Roland T. Owen was not who he said he was. A phone call to Los Angeles for the next of kin came up empty, and fingerprints of the deceased were sent to the Justice Department to await a match. But the case seemed to be going cold, until the hotel president received a mysterious phone call. A woman phoned the front desk to ask what Owen looked like and claimed to know him from a town named Clinton only 50 miles away. Sightings from around the city came in, and the Muhlebach Hotel, which the deceased had left due to the high rates, reported that he had checked in under another name, Eugene K. Scott. The LAPD confirmed that this was also likely a fake name, and the mystery only deepened. Soon, people from all around came, claiming to know the mysterious Mr. Owen under all different names. Was he the cousin of a man who came to see the body? No, that cousin died 5 years earlier. Was he a pro wrestler named Cecil Werner from Little Rock, Arkansas? No, the wrestling promoter couldn't make the match. New murders in the city soon stole the spotlight, and the mysterious death of Roland T. Owen, whoever he was, slipped away from the headlines. The body was going to be laid to rest in a potter's field when the funeral home received a mysterious phone call saying they would pay for a grave and service at a nearby cemetery. The funeral director asked what they knew about the death, and the person said that the man had been involved in a sordid affair while engaged to another woman. He said cheaters usually get what's coming to them, and hung up. Was the mystery man of room 1046 killed in a lover's spat gone wrong? And who was he? The answers would be a long time coming. It was over a year later when the next break in the case would come. The images of the man were circulated around the country, but it wasn't until a friend of Ruby Ogletree in Birmingham, Alabama saw him in the paper that the truth came out. Ruby quickly identified the man as her son, Artemis Ogletree. Her boy had hitchhiked to California in 1934, and he hadn't been home since. But she knew the details around the case that proved she was telling the truth. She quickly identified the cause of the distinctive scar on his temple as an accident with cooking grease he had as a child. She even showed the investigators letters her boy had sent her. There was just one problem. Several of the letters had been postmarked after Artemis Ogletree was murdered in Kansas City. Not just that, but Artemis was a simple boy who didn't know how to use a typewriter and used plain language. Several of the letters were typewritten and used literary language. She also had received phone calls from people who claimed to know Artemis, including one with a wild story about being in Egypt with him and Artemis saving his life in a fight. The man gave Ruby his name and she gave it to the police, but it's never been released. Who had been writing letters to a dead man's mother for years? With a new heap of evidence, courtesy of Artemis's grieving mother, the police reopened the case and soon they had their top suspect. Joseph Martin was arrested in 1936 in New York after killing his roommate and trying to ship the body to Memphis. When they found his wallet full of fake identification, they also found some handwriting that matched the letters received by Ruby Ogletree after Artemis's death. But no charges were ever filed and the case went cold. Who killed Artemis Ogletree in that locked hotel room in the Hotel President? Was it Joseph Martin as a part of his long career of crime? Was it an organized crime killing, and who was Dawn? Was it not a name at all and instead a title of a mob boss Artemis Ogletree had crossed? Or was it a lover's spat gone horribly wrong as Artemis's broken engagement came back to end his life? Or was there something else lurking in room 1046 of the Hotel President? Something unnatural that Artemis Ogletree was terrified of, that could stab a man to death with no knife to be found from behind a locked door. The mystery is still unsolved, and investigators still puzzle over it today, but the Hotel President is still taking guests to this day. A corpse discovered with overdeveloped athlete's legs, strange wedge-shaped feet, a scrap of paper torn from a poetry book with a single phrase hidden in a secret pocket. Who is the man behind the weirdest unsolved death ever? November 30th, 1948, Adelaide, Australia. It was a clear, warm night, the first summer day of the southern summer. John Bain Lyons and his wife decided to take the opportunity of nice weather and beautiful, clear night skies to do some stargazing down by the beach. As the couple walked along the sand, they spotted a man up ahead of them, dressed in slacks, a suit jacket, and a button-up shirt with a smart tie, but is lying in the sand with his head leaning against the seawall. The man lifts his right arm up and then lets it fall back to the ground. Assuming they had stumbled across a drunk sleeping off a bender, the couple ignores him and continues their pleasant stroll. 30 minutes later, a second couple comes across the man. As they walk along the seawall, they see the smartly dressed man done up in a suit with shoes spit polished to a perfect shine. The man isn't moving, and mosquitoes cover his face. The boyfriend jokes he must be dead to the world not to notice them. He has no idea how right he is, or that he's just stumbled across the most mysterious death in history. The next morning, a small crowd is gathered around the man. It's become clear to all that he is well and truly dead. The body is cold, and a half-smoked cigarette rests on his collar as if it's fallen out of his mouth while being smoked. The police are immediately contacted and the body removed to Royal Adelaide Hospital for inspection. The coroner suspects the man was poisoned, leading to heart failure. Try as they might, though, the authorities can't identify the man. He carries no ID, no wallet or cash, his clothes have no name tag, and all but one of the clothing designer's labels have been cut off. Inside his pockets are tickets from Adelaide to the beach where he was found dead, and a pack of chewing gum, 2 matches, 2 combs, a pack of cigarettes with 7 cigarettes of a different, more expensive brand inside of it. The police begin questioning the locals, but nobody knows who the man is. Meanwhile, the coroner continues his own investigation, deducing the man has indeed been poisoned, but not by food. Curiously, the man has unnaturally small pupils, and his spleen was 3 times normal size. The liver is greatly distended with blood. Despite being in his late 40s, the man has extremely well-defined calf muscles, clearly the legs of a very accomplished athlete. However, his toes are wedge-shaped, leading an expert to suppose the man had been in the habit of wearing high-heeled and pointed shoes. Was the man a cross-dressing fitness enthusiast or perhaps a ballet dancer? Nobody knew. Fingerprints were taken and shared throughout the entire English-speaking world, and yet no identity for the mysterious corpse could be ascertained. His photos were published in newspapers and dozens of locals brought to the morgue to identify the body, yet nobody recognized the mysterious dead stranger. As the investigation intensifies, a poison expert believes he knows how the man was killed, but the poisons that may have been used are so deadly he refuses to name them out loud in court. Sir Cedric Stanton Hicks instead writes the name of 2 poisons on a scrap of sheet paper, digitalis and strophanthin. Both of these poisons are incredibly toxic and have the added benefit of breaking down very quickly after death, leaving no trace behind for police to discover. One of the poisons is so rare it can only be made from a combination of the oil inside the seeds of specific plants in Africa, parts of a poisonous fish native to the Benue River, and snake venom. The poison is used by one Somali tribe for hunting and has a terrifying reputation of its ability to kill an adult human in 10 minutes or less. Police are now broadening their investigation across Adelaide and checking in with every hotel, dry cleaner, lost property office, and railway station for lost or abandoned luggage. Perhaps the victim left behind some personal belongings that could shed light on the mystery. On January 12th, detectives at the main railway station are given a brown suitcase that has been deposited there on November 30th. The suitcase has no identifying characteristics. In fact, it's clear that somebody went through a lot of trouble to remove all the labels and brand markings. Only a single label on a shirt remains, with the name T. Keen written inside, but the police quickly conclude the name is a red herring, meant to throw people off the trail of the owner's real identity. However, police do find orange thread inside the suitcase that's identical to the thread used to repair a hole in the dead man's trouser pocket. The suitcase and its strange contents belong to the victim. Other than the 3 shirts, the suitcase also contains a stencil kit used to stencil labels on cargo aboard merchant ships, a table knife missing part of its haft, and a coat stitched in a style native to America but not Australia. Just when police thought the mystery couldn't possibly deepen, a shocking new find on the corpse would open up a bevy of new questions. The authorities brought in an expert pathologist to re-examine the corpse and its possessions in the hopes of gathering more clues. While the new investigation into the body revealed nothing new, a more thorough search of the man's clothing revealed a small pocket sewn into the waistband of the man's trousers, and inside it, a tightly rolled up scrap of paper with the words Tamam Shud written on it. A reporter for the Adelaide Advertiser recognized the words as Persian and recommended the police look into the Rubaiyat of Omar Khayyam, a book of Persian poetry from the 12th century that had been translated by Edward Fitzgerald and become quite popular in Australia during the war years. The words are discovered to be the last words in the English translation of the book, and it meant it is ended. Despite a search of libraries, booksellers, and publishers, though, the police can't find a copy of the book with the same font as that on the scrap of paper. By now, the body has begun to decompose, but police were reluctant to give up their only real leads, so they had the body embalmed and buried in a plot specifically chosen to be easier to exhume should the need arise. A full 8 months after the mysterious death, a man walked into the police station in Adelaide with a rather mysterious tale. Shortly after the discovery of the unidentified body, he and his brother-in-law went for a ride in a car that he kept parked just a few hundred yards from the beach the dead man was found on. The duo spotted a copy of the Rubaiyat lying on the floor of the rear seats, but each assumed it belonged to the other. Upon reading the newspaper account of the mysterious death, the man had a hunch and checked the book, discovering, to their surprise, that the final words of the book had been torn out. It was a perfect match to the scrap of paper found in the dead man's secret pocket. But that wasn't the only secret the book held. Written on the back cover so lightly in pencil as to almost be missed was a phone number, along with a few letters written in capitals. The phone number is unlisted, but it belongs to a young woman that police refused to identify in order to protect her identity. That woman confirms that she once gifted the book in question to a man during the war, Alfred Boxall. At last, the police have a name, and it only took days to find his home in Maroubra, New South Wales. Mystery solved, except for one problem. Boxall was still alive and still had the copy of the book that the nurse gifted him. The police are at a dead end yet again and return to the nurse. The nurse tells the police that sometime the year before, some neighbors had told her that a man had come by and asked for her. When police showed her a cast they had made of the dead man's face, the nurse looked as if she would faint, but denied she knew who he was. Though police suspected the nurse knew more than she was telling, they were once more at a dead end, until they took a closer look at the book found in the parked car. Under a UV light, police discover a jumble of letters and realize they have a code of some type on their hands. The code is published in the press and sent to Naval Intelligence and the best code breakers in Australia. The Navy reports back that the code seems to be unbreakable. There's simply not enough of it to make sense. Police never did crack the code, and no further clues would be forthcoming in the case of the world's most mysterious death. Amateur sleuths in modern times would re-examine the case and suspect that the nurse and the dead man clearly knew each other given the intensity of her reaction to being presented a cast of the dead man's face. The identity of the nurse, which the police had kept hidden, was finally revealed, and photos of the woman's son suggested a striking similarity to the dead man. A second dead man will be found with a copy of the Rubaiyat in Australia, a Jewish immigrant from Singapore named George Marshall. He was discovered with a copy of the book near him, a 7th edition from a publisher in London. There was only one problem. The book was only ever published in 5 editions, making this 7th edition publishing as fake as that linked to the original dead body in 1948. Finally, a careful review of police files discovered that in 1959, a man gave a statement that on that night in question, he had seen one man carrying another man on his shoulder near the water's edge, and very close to where the dead body was later discovered. Recently, DNA was successfully extracted from the hairs found in the casting of the man's face made by police. An investigation into possible relatives discovered that the man might have had a large group of relatives living on the east coast of the United States, potentially making our mystery man an American and not Australian. However, no living relative has yet been confirmed. What does any of this mean? Who is our mysterious dead stranger with unusually small pupils, enlarged internal organs, well-defined athlete's legs, and a copy of a book that may have been part of a secret code? Some have theorized that the man must have been a spy, given the location of a top-secret British rocketry base a few hundred miles away. Other theories posit that the man might have been part of a very influential criminal underground network and crossed the wrong people. Whatever the truth may be, it seemed that it died on that summer night back in 1948. Only adding to the mystery, flowers would be left on the dead man's grave until 1978, with nobody ever discovering how they were left there or who was responsible. July 1st, 1981, at around 4 in the afternoon, some furniture removers working at a house in Wonderland Avenue in LA's Laurel Canyon neighborhood hear a woman groaning. It's coming from the house next door, number 8763. Peering through a window, what they see is nothing short of a bloodbath. In a panic, one of them calls 911. Soon, hardened detective Bob Souza is on the scene. What he finds surprises even him. People in the house have been beaten so violently they barely look recognizable. He turns to his partner, Detective Lange, and says, "This is overkill. This has to be a revenge killing." What he was looking at was a crime scene that became known as the Wonderland Murders, a slaughter that involved drug-addicted thugs, a legendary porn actor, a neo-Nazi, and a drug kingpin at the center of it, whose clients included Hollywood movie stars. All of these people, and likely more folks, were enmeshed in one of the biggest American crime mysteries of all time. It's true that when Souza first witnessed the utter brutality of the murders, he knew this was a lot more than just some house invasion or a drug deal that had gone wrong. He later said he'd never seen so much blood in his life, describing the crime scene as even gorier than one of LA's other much publicized crimes, the Tate LaBianca murders, aka the Manson family murders. Souza and Lange survey the house once the groaning woman, Susan Lanius, was taken to the hospital. Drugs and paraphernalia were everywhere, as were the murder weapons, steel pipes and hammers. Susan was lucky to be alive, but the others hadn't stood a chance. Their heads pretty much crushed in by the sustained attack. Those victims were Ron Lanius, Barbara Richardson, Billy DeVerrell, and Joy Miller. When Susan was discovered, she was lying on the floor next to her bed. In the bed, still under the covers, was her husband, Ron, who was lying in a pool of blood next to the hammer that had likely killed him. The nightstand next to the bed had been ransacked. Miller was lying on a bed in another room, her legs hanging off it. DeVerrell was propped up at the foot of the bed against the television stand. His entire half-naked body was covered in blood from head to toe. The entire room had been ransacked. The TV was on, playing Channel 3. Richardson was the only one discovered downstairs, next to the sofa that she'd been sleeping on. It seemed that a gang had entered the house when all the occupants were asleep. They'd likely all been bludgeoned before they could put up any kind of a fight. Now you need to know something about the victims, a bunch of people who certainly had a track history of doing bad things themselves. In the 1970s and 1980s, 8763 Wonderland Avenue was a notorious place. Wild parties were often thrown there, fights erupted, people walked in and out of the house looking like they'd been on a 10-day drug and booze bender. They looked like that because they had. Miller was the actual owner of the house, and she lived there with her boyfriend, DeVerrell. The reason Sue and Ron Lanius were there was they were part of the outfit, which was the Wonderland Gang. These people made hay while cocaine covered the streets of LA like a bad snowstorm in Maine. From the house, they dealt huge amounts of the stuff, which of course meant a lot of unseemly characters going around there from time to time. One of those characters was the porn legend John Holmes, a man noted for his incredibly large phallus and the fact that after giving up his meatpacking job, he slept with in the region of 14,000 women. The people often found in that house were sketchy, to say the least. Ron Lanius had been dishonorably discharged from the U.S. Army for smuggling heroin back from Vietnam in the body bags of dead soldiers. He was also later linked to the murder of a snitch, but was never convicted of it. He did spend time in prison, though, for smuggling heroin over the U.S.-Mexico border. According to the cops, he was ruthless and cold. A detective once said about him, "You could put a gun to his head and his pulse would never break 70. DeVerrell was not so cool-headed. He was a longtime heroin addict who wanted out of the game but wasn't able to due to his addiction. He was never 2 steps away from Lanius. Miller, too, was an addict, and that's the reason she fell in with the gang. As for Barbara Richardson, it seems she was only guilty of being the girlfriend of another member of the gang. His name was David Lind, a heroin addict with a history of violence who was a member of the Aryan Brotherhood. He should have been there that night, but fortunately for him, he was at a motel in the San Fernando Valley taking large amounts of drugs with a prostitute. As for Susan, the survivor, while she was no angel, she was only at the house because her husband was. We'd like to tell you that she later told the cops everything she saw that night, but her skull was smashed so bad she lost part of it. She suffered from amnesia after that and was never able to recall anything that happened on that fateful night. Okay, so why would anyone have committed such brutal act against these people, some of whom were not really hardened criminals? As you know, this wasn't a cut-and-dried robbery, it was revenge. Someone wanted to make a statement. The murders happened on July 1st, but it was what happened on June 29th which explains, or might explain, the bloodbath a couple of days later. And that's because the Wonderland gang had brazenly robbed a very well-known figure in the underworld. His name was John Nash, a person who'd arrived in the USA after spending time in a Palestinian refugee camp. He had it tough growing up, never forgetting seeing his brother-in-law shot down by Israel Defense Force soldiers. When he landed on the US shores, he had all of $7 to his name, but he soon put a lot more money in his pocket. Let's just say his hard-knock life made him not only someone not to be messed with, but it was also the motivation behind him making stacks of cash in the land of milk and honey. After some years of living in the US, he was the owner of nightclubs, strip clubs, and restaurants in LA. It was at one of his nightclubs that he met John Holmes. They were actually quite close. Nash loved introducing his friends to the man with the celebrity penis. Holmes wasn't exactly a household name, but in the bars and clubs he was something of a star. He was also an avid consumer of cocaine and crack cocaine, which pretty much resulted in his once gifted member not being able to rise to the occasion. That was about the time he told the gang about his nightclub owner Buddy that kept a lot of money and drugs in his house. On June 29th, Ron Lanius, DeVerrell, and Lind paid Nash a visit. They had a driver that we haven't mentioned yet in Tracy McCourt. He didn't enter the house, but waited outside in a stolen getaway car, a Ford Granada. The plan was simple. Holmes had been at Nash's house on 3 occasions earlier in the day, partying a little and asking to buy some cocaine. When he left the place for the last time, he opened a latch on the patio door, believing that Nash wouldn't know it was unlocked. Through Holmes, the gang knew that Nash kept a lot of cash in the house, as well as large amounts of heroin and cocaine. Holmes also informed them that he had a stash of guns. What they might not have been fully aware of was the wickedness of the man they were going to rob. The robbery, for the most part, went smoothly, even though Nash's bodyguard was grazed with a bullet from a gun that had been accidentally fired. After seeing that, Nash got down on the floor and pleaded for his life, something that quietly enraged him. Still, he opened the safe. The gang, high on life, as well as drugs, laughed out loud when they drove away with $1.2 million, about $3.4 million in today's cash worth of drugs, mostly cocaine and heroin. The haul also included cash, guns, and jewelry. They were rich. For the time being, at least. As for what happened the day after, stories differ. Some accounts say Holmes was seen by some of Nash's men wearing some of the stolen jewelry, and he was subsequently dragged back to Nash's house. Other accounts state Holmes went there on purpose just to take the heat off him. In his book, My Life with Liberace, drug addict and former lover of Liberace, Scott Thornton, said he was at Nash's house buying drugs when he saw Holmes being beaten by Nash's bodyguard. He also claims to have heard Nash explain to Holmes that if he didn't tell him who committed the robbery, he was going to have someone in his family murdered. This scenario looks very likely when you hear what Detective Susan Lange found at Nash's house a few days later. That was around $1 million worth of cocaine. And guess what? The cops didn't find any cocaine, or at least any substantial amount, at the Wonderland house. At Nash's house were also things that looked like they'd been taken from the house on Wonderland. It looks as though this crime should have been solved then and there, but it just wasn't that simple. The cops certainly thought Holmes had been one of the men who did the Wonderland hit. His fingerprints were found on one of the bed headboards right above where a bloodied Lanius was found lying. Still, when he went to court on a charge of 4 murders, the verdict came back not guilty. Holmes was seen as one of the victims in all of this, being forced by the gang to do what they told him. On March 13, 1988, police visited Holmes as he was dying from complications due to AIDS. They asked him again what happened that night. Holmes was so sick all he could get out were mumbled, incoherent words. He died soon after the visit. Later in 1988, the Los Angeles Times dropped a bombshell. The paper wrote that soon after the murders, Holmes sat in a bathtub crying. He turned to his wife Sharon and said, "There's somebody out there who wants to kill me." She asked why, to which he replied, "The murders. I was involved. I know who did it. I had to stand there and watch what they did," he told Sharon, saying what he saw he could never forget. It was similar to what the cops thought but couldn't prove, although their theory had Holmes joining in on the murders. Police were still working on the case at that point. They were sure they knew what had happened, but as yet just couldn't prove it. Detective Lange told the Times, "There's no mystery because we know who's involved and we know why." As for Nash, he was never charged with the murders, although he did spend about 2 years in prison for cocaine possession. In 1990, a jury decided 11-1 that Nash was behind the murders, but since that was a hung verdict, he was acquitted. Many years later, he admitted he bribed the lone juror who voted in his favor with $50,000. He was convicted of money laundering and admitted to jury tampering, but in the end, he didn't go back to prison and just paid a $250,000 fine. He died in 2014, aged 85. But surely, if he had sent those men around to that house, the authorities would have convicted him. There's also the fact that no way could Holmes and the bodyguard have done it alone, if they had done it. Holmes' wife Sharon told the police that Holmes had indeed helped plan the robbery, but under some amount of duress from the gang. She said after the murder, he was held at Nash's house while Nash scanned his address book. Nash then listed some of the people in that book who would be assassinated if Holmes didn't tell the truth about the robbery. Holmes was known as being a liar throughout his life. That's why people didn't believe the story that Sharon came out with. An attorney would comment, based on the material given to us by John Holmes, that version of the facts is not an accurate one. Then there's Thorson's story. He'd been in and out of prison himself after the murders, and for the most part, he didn't talk much about the Wonderland murders. Maybe he did know too much, because after testifying in the case, he was put into witness protection. That didn't prevent him from getting shot 5 times in 1990. While he's still in prison right now, he talked more after Nash died. In 2021, he was interviewed in prison by the Daily Beast. He said it was a very sensitive subject, but now that Eddie Nash is dead, I don't really care. He called Nash the drug lord of Los Angeles, alluding to the fact that he wasn't the kind of person you could just steal from. Thorson said yet again that he saw the bodyguard hitting Holmes and demanded to know who had committed the robbery. He also said this, "I was there when they brought him back. There were certain things that the police department never told the public at the time, like that the victims were beaten so hard that there were indentations of the pipe on their forehead." According to Thorson, Nash was renowned in Hollywood for having the most superior cocaine and heroin. He said it was he who helped hook Nash up to drug-taking celebrities such as John Belushi and Richard Pryor. "We had the best coke in town, and we were supplying it to Hollywood. So that's what was going on," said Thorson. If you believe him, on the night of the murders, Holmes and the others had expected all the gang to be there, and killing the largely innocent women hadn't been planned. The question is, can you believe his story? Well, he might be the last survivor who can tell such a story because there really are no more people who can talk about those bad old days. Remember David Lind, the neo-Nazi who was at the motel the night it happened? Well, he died in 1995 from a heroin overdose. The bodyguard died in 1997 from liver failure. Tracy McCourt, the driver, passed away in 2006, although no cause of death was reported. There were almost certainly other assailants that night, so no doubt someone out there knows the truth. It's a wonder the crime has never been officially solved. Although a journalist working on the case explained the main reason for that, saying, "When a crime is committed in hell, you're not going to find angels for witnesses." He still believes there are witnesses out there right now who can fill in most of the gaps to this grisly tale. A hooded man stands over you, wielding a hammer, dripping with your blood. You cower below him, head still aching from the force of the blow. You can't see his face, but you can recognize his voice. This man is a monster. He imprisoned you, tortured you, and just when you thought you'd finally escaped his clutches, he returned to finish the job. "You thought you could escape me," he says with a laugh as he raises the hammer. "No, you die here. Nobody can ever know." But before he can bring the hammer down and end your short life, there's a rustling upstairs. It's your foster family. They finally returned. When your hooded attacker hears them coming, he bolts, disappearing like a candle in the night. You breathe a sigh of relief, having staved off death for another day. But part of you knows you haven't seen the last of him. Part of you knows you never will. And worse still, when your foster family finally finds you, they see your wound and you tell them your tale, none of them believe you. But you know he's out there, the hooded man who once imprisoned you, the hooded man who wants you dead. Imagine waking up with no memory of who you are. One day, every detail of your life is lost to you and you can't even remember your own name. All you know is that you spent your whole childhood imprisoned against your will. And if that's not bad enough, imagine you also have a number of assassins hunting you, only you can't remember why. Now this all sounds like it could easily be a plot of the new John Wick-style hitman action movie, but these events actually occurred during the life of one of the most enigmatic men who ever lived. This is the life and mystery of Caspar Hauser, history's most mysterious man. Welcome to 19th century Germany, a time of rapid population growth that led to the creation of slums in urban areas where the infant mortality rate was on the rise. Among all this, in 1828, a boy believed to be as young as 16 was found wandering the streets of the city now known as Nuremberg. The boy, dressed only in tattered clothes, had nothing in his possession, save for an envelope containing 2 letters. Who was this boy? Where did he come from? What was he doing here? The answer to these questions, or in some cases the lack thereof, would go on to horrify everyone. The first letter, addressed to Captain von Vessenig, the captain of a local cavalry regiment, was seemingly penned by an anonymous laborer who had found Casper and raised him. The second letter, however, was dated 1812 and believed to have been written by Casper's mother. It stated that he was being sent to join the military as she could no longer care for her son. This strange, feral child that had one day appeared walking the streets of Nuremberg in tatters must have been terrified of his new surroundings. Casper had no clue that over the course of the next 5 years, he would quickly become one of the most talked about people in Europe. At first glance, Casper appeared to be nothing more than a common orphan or a street urchin. Though appearances can be deceptive, he was initially unable to communicate verbally. His eyes, being unused to the sunlight, were reddish, and his feet were badly blistered from a long and agonizing walk. All these new and frightening sensations, pain, sunlight, exhaustion, must have terrified the teenage boy. Despite being a teenager, Casper seemed to be a total stranger to the rest of the world around him. He was detained for being a vagrant and brought before the local authorities. While they tried to figure out exactly what to do with the boy, they noted that he only appeared to have very little ability to communicate. The phrases that he could say, "don't know," and "I want to be a rider like my father," were all he could use to express himself. Even when he tried to let the guards know he was thirsty, he seemed to only be able to write his name and couldn't describe where he'd come from or what had happened to him. His behavior was noted as being very abnormal. Casper had no knowledge of how to eat using proper manners and would only consume bread and water. Strangely, the scent of things like meat, vegetables, and alcohol would cause him to suffer violent convulsions, and coffee even made him vomit. Something terrible had happened to Casper. They just needed to figure out what. No one knew where he'd come from or what had been done to Casper since his birth, and he had no way of explaining his origins. During his 2 months in prison, his care was overseen by one Andreas Hiltel. During his time there, Major Burgermeister Binder had taken a keen interest in Casper and had the boy visit him to try and rebuild a more detailed picture of his unknown origin, and to offer Casper education under a teacher named Professor Friedrich Daumer. Much to Herr Binder's surprise, it reportedly only took a mere few weeks for Casper to learn how to read and write, greatly improving his communication skills. While some believed that at this time Casper's speech was still not coherent enough to determine the events of his past, the mayor was determined to know where the boy had come from. According to Herr Binder, Casper told him the following horrific story. He was kept from a young age in a small, dark room where he was made to sleep on a straw bed and fed only a diet of bread and water. The only other human being young Casper had any interaction with was a stranger, an unnamed man who would leave bread next to Casper as he slept. Occasionally, the man would also give the boy water that tasted bitter and, according to Casper, made him sleep for much longer than normal. After this unnamed figure drugged him, the boy would awaken to find his hair and fingernails had been cut, and he'd been cleaned up as best as possible. The young boy was kept like this in horrendous conditions, made to live in an almost vegetative state, taught by the unknown man how to write his own name and say a few phrases he knew, but with no comprehension of what they meant. He was living the real old boy experience, and nobody knew why. The story of what had happened to Casper, as interpreted by Binder, soon garnered a lot of attention, and speculation as to whether any of this was true became widespread. People all across Europe speculated. Some believed that Casper had been raised in the forests, similar to a feral child, but with at least some prior parenting, hence the phrases he knew how to say. Modern-day theories range from Casper being epileptic or having some sort of undiagnosed medical condition that gave him visions and led to a lot of his extravagant claims, while others argue that if the story of his abuse was in fact true, then the boy might have gone mad as a result, driven to delusions by prolonged suffering. Another theory posited that Caspar Hauser was actually a prince. It was speculated by some at the time that the infant Prince of Baden, who officially died in October 1812, was actually switched out with a different boy who died on the aforementioned date, leaving the prince to emerge as Caspar Hauser in 1828. The Grand Duke of Baden at the time had no male heir, meaning that his uncle Louis became the next in line. So it seemed plausible that there could have been a plot to put Louis in charge by taking the Duke's son out of the picture. After all, why would have Caspar been put through all this horrific mistreatment unless he posed some sort of threat to a person of great power? Despite being a popular theory, there's a lot of evidence to the contrary that seems to refute this tale of switched babies. A number of letters that the Grand Duke's mother wrote include the details relating to her grandchild's birth and the illness that led to his death in 1812. Things only got stranger for Caspar the older he got, as his dark past returned and the young man suffered a number of attempts on his life. or at least that's what he claimed. After being placed in the full-time care of his teacher Frederick Dahmer, Casper was discovered with a heavily bleeding wound on his forehead, hiding in Dahmer's cellar on the 17th of October 1829, when he was either 17 or 18. According to the boy, a hooded man had broken into the house and attacked him, telling Casper, "You still have to die ere you leave the city of Nuremberg." He was understandably shaken up by the ordeal, especially as Hauser also claimed that he recognized the assailant's voice as belonging to the man who had held him captive. As much as this story seemed to fuel the Prince of Baden theory that surrounded him, some think it's possible that his head injury was self-inflicted and done so that Casper could garner sympathy after a recent argument he and Dahmer had. The professor had told Casper that he thought the boy was a liar. One thing no one could refute about Casper Hauser: most of the stories he told of his life were undeniably exaggerated. Even the story about spending his early years in captivity seemed to have plenty of holes in it. For one thing, if he'd spent so much time living without light, he would have suffered from a disease known as rickets. This occurs when the body doesn't receive enough vitamin D, which we naturally absorb from sunlight and causes the bones to soften. But no reports ever mentioned Casper having any skeletal deformities. The fact that he seemed to very quickly adapt to the new world he found himself in was also casting doubt into people's minds as to whether anything the boy had claimed was even remotely true. People suspected that the attempted assassinations on Casper Hauser were nothing more than hoaxes, and that any injuries he sustained were carried out by the boy himself as a plot for more attention and further pity. Although this wouldn't have been much understood at the time, this is symptomatic of a mental health condition known as Munchausen syndrome. Those with this condition intentionally embellish details about their lives and can even go as far as inflicting injuries on themselves as a way to garner sympathy from those around them. The mystery was just getting stranger and stranger. Whether true or fictionalized, Casper Hauser claimed on a further 2 instances to have been attacked by assassins intent on killing him. After the first attack, Hauser was placed under the care of Johann Bieberbach, a member of the local authorities. On the 3rd of April 1830, the Bieberbach household was shocked to hear the noise of a pistol shot coming from Casper's bedroom. Hauser was once again found with a bleeding wound to the head. He claimed that an unseen assailant no one else noticed had shot him, but when pressed for details, Casper said he could provide no details of his latest attacker. Was it the hooded man returning again to silence his extremely talkative victim? Casper later changed his story, claiming that he'd accidentally knocked a pistol that was displayed on the wall down, causing an accidental shot that led to his injury. Much like the previous assassination attempt, this incident followed a similar argument wherein Casper was accused of lying. Perhaps the harshest review of Hauser's character was given by Mr. Bieberbach, who called the young man full of vanity and spite. The authorities decided to move Hauser once again, and in May 1830 he was transferred to the house of one Baron von Tuchar. The Baron would also go on to make several complaints about Casper Hauser's tall tales. The tallest of tales would come in December of 1833 when, now at 21, Hauser came home with another heavily bleeding wound, this time in his chest. His story was that a stranger lured him into the Ansbach court garden and stabbed him when he'd arrived, leaving a small bag behind as they fled. When the police searched the court garden, they indeed found a small purse containing a note in German that read, "Hauser will be able to tell you quite precisely how I look and from where I am. To save Hauser the effort, I want to tell you myself from where I come. I come from the Bavarian border on the river. I will even tell you the name, MLO." Casper Hauser ultimately died from the wound on the 17th of December 1833. His death was regarded as suspicious given the number of contradictions and inconsistencies in which he claimed happened. Why would an assassin intentionally leave behind a note mentioning where he was from? Another strange detail at the scene was that there was no second set of footprints. It'd been snowing heavily, but only Hauser's prints were present. If Casper had been murdered, the perpetrator was a ghost. Given all those contradicting details in the story, the Ansbach court strongly suspected that Hauser had stabbed himself, maybe for attention like the other attacks, but he'd ended up stabbing himself deeper than planned. Doctors at the time even agreed that the wound could have been self-inflicted. As for the note, it became widely believed that Hauser had just written it himself in a ploy to create more public interest in his story. As it turned out, it worked, but he didn't survive to see it. No one knows for certain if Casper Hauser lied throughout his life, but there were so many contrivances in the accounts of many of the events that he experienced, especially the attempted assassinations, that just didn't seem to add up. In fact, the entire mystery that surrounded Casper was probably thought up by Hauser himself, either as a way of attracting attention or as a result of severe mental illness. We may never know. All we know is that ultimately, the strange enigmatic boy who wandered the streets of Nuremberg won in the end, as his true identity is still debated to this day. A car crash survivor, a star athlete, a teenage girl hanging out with her friends, children frolicking on the beach. One of the most powerful men in New York. They couldn't be more different individuals, but they all have one thing in common. They vanished into thin air and were never seen again. Years or even decades later, find out who they were and maybe where they went on this episode of the Infographics Show. The most disturbing stories of people going missing, number 3. Number 6. Brandon Swanson. The year was 2008 and life was pretty good for Brandon Swanson. The 19-year-old had graduated from high school and was studying wind turbines at a community and technical college in Canby, Minnesota. Classes had finished for the year and he did what any college boy would do. He partied. On May 13th, he hit up 2 different house parties, reportedly drinking a little but not enough to be visibly drunk. Still determined to make it home to his parents that night, he got behind the wheel, regardless of whether he was over the legal limit. And that is where things started to get strange. His hometown was 30 miles away from Canby, and he was leaving close to midnight. It should have taken less than an hour to get home, but around 2 a.m. his parents received a call. The drive hadn't gone well. Brandon had driven his Chevy off the road and into a ditch. Fortunately, he was unharmed, but the car was stuck, so he asked his parents to come pick him up. They got in their pickup truck and headed out into the night to rescue their son. Although the cell reception wasn't great, they managed to keep in touch with him the whole time. Brandon stayed with his car, flashing the lights to let his parents know where he was, but they would never find him. His parents thought they knew where he was but never came across his car. Frustrated, Brandon said he was going to walk towards some lights in the distance. He believed that he was near a small town called Lind and agreed to meet his father at a bar parking lot on the outskirts of town. As Brandon walked, his father stayed on the line, and then 47 minutes into the call, Brandon suddenly yelled in shock. Then he went silent. Frantic, his father hung up and tried to call him back, but Brandon never answered the call, and he never made it to the bar. So where did Brandon Swanson go? That morning, his parents reported him missing, but the police in Lind weren't interested at first. After all, Brandon was an adult, and college students wandered off all the time. One officer even told his mother it was his right to be missing. But later that morning, they began a search and found no sign of Brandon. The sheriff's office obtained the cell phone records and discovered the first truly disturbing sign of the case. Brandon's cell phone was last tracked to the town of Taunton, around 25 miles from Lind. How did Brandon get so far from where he thought he was? It wouldn't be long before Brandon's car was found in a ditch, exactly as he described, but it wasn't close to the location he had described. There were now multiple police departments involved in the case, and they carefully examined the car. It was caught in the ditch, unable to pull itself out of the incline, but it wasn't damaged. There was no sign of foul play in the car, so the working theory was that Brandon had just gotten frustrated and started walking. And there was no way of knowing where he walked to. Larger search parties were assembled and his cell phone was tracked through the nearby area. It pinged off of cell towers and led to a nearby farm in Taunton. Dogs picked up a scent but lost it near the Yellow Medicine River. The trail seemed to enter the water and vanish. The river wasn't especially wide, and at its deepest it reached around 15 feet. That means Brandon may have been able to walk through it, especially if he was trying to take a shortcut. But if the water level was high that night, it's just as likely he could have slipped, lost his footing, and drowned. And the only thing more unsettling than evidence of a disappearance is no evidence at all. The original search didn't find any sign of Swanson, and with no sign of foul play, efforts were quickly decreased. But the Swansons didn't give up on their son, leaving their porch light on every night as a signal of their hope that they'll get answers. Searches would resume in the fall as fields were harvested and grounds were cleared. Dogs searched for human remains until the winter, and again in the spring. And while they would occasionally pick up something, no remains were ever found. With no concrete evidence, the most prevailing theory is that Brandon drowned, but hard answers are still impossible to find. But one positive may have come out of the tragic case. Annette Swanson never forgot what that callous cop had told her, and that Brandon's right to be missing may have delayed the initial search. She and Brandon's father, Brian, began advocating for changes to state law that would speed up the search for a missing adult, making it as speedy as it is with missing children. And in July 2009, the bill known as Brandon's Law would take effect and revolutionize coordination between agencies when dealing with missing persons cases in Minnesota. But some cases have been open for far longer than Brandon's. Number 5. Laureen Ron. In the 1980s, free-range parenting was much more common, and often out of necessity. Hardworking parents would often have no choice but to trust their teenage and preteen kids to make good life choices after school until the work whistle blew. But that would change in the coming years, amid a wave of disappearances and kidnappings. And one of the strangest cases happened in Manchester, New Hampshire in 1980. Lorene Ron was a 14-year-old girl primarily raised by her single mother, Judith. She was known as an outgoing girl and a good student, at least on the surface. People reported she was falling in with a bad crowd and had started to smoke weed and drink. And that might be what led her into trouble. It was April 26, 1980, and Lorene was staying home alone. Her mother was out of town attending her boyfriend's tennis match, and Lorene took advantage of this, inviting two friends, a boy and a girl, back to the apartment. They drank a little. Lorene reportedly had a connection at the local convenience store where she would help out in exchange for wine coolers. It was after midnight when strange things started happening. The boy Lorene was with reported hearing strange voices in the hallways of the apartment. He became disturbed and left through the back door, thinking that Judith was returning. He didn't want to get caught and get Lorene in trouble, but it wasn't Judith at all. Lorene's mother returned home in the early morning, and as soon as she entered the building, she noticed something was off. The apartment building's light bulbs had been unscrewed, leaving all 3 floors in complete darkness. Her apartment door was unlocked, and as she peered into her daughter's room, it seemed occupied. But her boyfriend noticed the back door was unlocked. When she checked the bed, it was the third girl who had fallen asleep, but had no idea where Lorene was. She claimed the missing girl had been in bed with her but left to sleep in the living room. She remembered nothing unusual about the night. But Lorene was nowhere to be found. Judith frantically called her family members to see if Lorene was with them. None of Lorene's possessions were missing, and there were no signs of a struggle. She flagged down a police car to report her daughter missing, and a massive search began. The initial theory was that Lorene had run away, and they quickly picked up clues leading to that theory. A bus company employee said he sold a ticket to a girl that resembled Lorene, and a driver said he had dropped her off in Boston. But she didn't come home, and there was no sign of her. When the bus driver was interviewed again weeks later, he wasn't as confident that it was Ron he had seen. Interest soon turned to another girl, Rachel Garden, who disappeared from Newton, New Hampshire months earlier. It was one of a streak of disappearances and killings in the area that would ultimately be traced to the suspected serial killer, Terry Rasmussen. But there has been no evidence that links him to Ron's disappearance. The police have never conclusively stated that they believed she was murdered. In fact, the evidence may point in the opposite direction. In October 1980, Judith received strange phone charges from California, a state she had never lived in and had no connections to. Had Lorene made it all the way across the country, and was she calling to seek help? Later, an investigator from an organization that helped runaways, Carol Jensen, spoke to a physician who claimed he may have seen Ron at his clinic. And through the next year, Judith started receiving mysterious phone calls by someone who never spoke, simply listening on the phone. These calls were especially common during the festive season. And while there was no hard evidence, some people wouldn't give up the fight. Jensen was one of the people most involved in the case. She would visit California in 1986 to investigate the motels Lorene may have called from. She found that the motels had a seedy reputation for criminal activity. And along the way, there were more unexplained incidents. A childhood friend of the girl received a call from someone claiming to be her. In 1988, a witness claimed to see someone in Anchorage, Alaska, who matched her description. But Lorene Ron was never seen up close again, and no one knows if she simply disappeared or was taken. Sometimes someone who seems to have everything can have it fall apart in a second. Number 4. Logan Schneidelman. For Logan Schneidelman, it seemed like life was smiling down on him. He was a star football player and a model student, and everyone thought that he would be going on to big things. But behind the football jersey, some dark clouds were gathering. Logan came from a troubled background. His Saudi Arabian father was absent in his life, and his mother eventually gave up custody, leaving him in the care of his grandmother. As a biracial teen, Logan struggled with his identity, something that only deepened after a girl made racist remarks to him. But none of that explains what happened in 2016. Logan graduated from high school in 2015 and went on to Washington State University, 300 miles away from his hometown of Tumwater. But he struggled and dropped out after a year. He returned home living with his grandmother, Ginny Gibo, and his half-sister, Chloe, where he started smoking weed. His grandmother stated that he seemed paranoid and at loose ends. He was working odd jobs, and on May 19th, his grandmother reported he seemed more nervous and focused than usual as he set out for work. But he would never get to his job. The last thing Logan said to Gibo before he set out was that he had an epiphany. She wanted to know more, but he said that they would talk more later. He didn't return home, and when she tracked his cell phone, it was found to be near Olympia, near where his mother lived. When there was no contact with him, his grandmother filed a missing persons report. But due to Logan being an adult and the police department being closed for the weekend, She had to wait until Monday. She would soon find out that his car had been impounded the day after he disappeared, after being found parked on the highway. But there was no sign of the man driving it. All of his personal items were found in the car, including his wallet, driver's license, and cash. So whatever happened, it didn't seem like Logan was planning on setting out for a trip. Soon, several witnesses would come forward saying that they all saw the car at the side of the road, and one woman reported seeing Logan with two white men standing near his car. She would drive by later that night and see the car abandoned with the hood lifted. Another strange report described Logan's car initially weaving through traffic before hitting a concrete barrier and stopping. They saw a white man jump out of the car and run out into the woods, but they couldn't see who was driving the car at that point. It was all hands on deck, but answers wouldn't be easy to come by. Police gathered all the reports that they had of unusual activity the night of Logan's disappearance, including one that saw a naked teenager running through the area. While it could have been Logan, the physical descriptions at night weren't clear enough to identify him. Logan's uncle, Mike Ware, was a retired area sheriff, so he took the lead on the initial investigation. The entire area was combed by foot and by air, with a focus on the forest. But Schneidelman had disappeared without a trace, which meant that it was time to start looking at suspects. The initial investigation focused on his cell phone, which had been traced but eventually stopped where his vehicle was found. No signs of his phone were available after that. While there was no clear evidence of foul play, police focused their investigation on Chloe's boyfriend, who had recently moved in. Reportedly, he and Logan had been butting heads, but he cooperated with the investigation and passed a polygraph test, ruling him out. As the officials were coming up empty, the family had hired a private investigator and launched an online campaign seeking answers. Reward funds were raised, and the case was profiled on the Investigation Discovery documentary in 2018. But the evidence was slim, and Logan's case is still considered open. Was it a simple case of an at-loose-ends young man disappearing to find a new path, or did the two men he was seen with have something to do with his vanishing? Not only is there very little evidence in this case, there is precious little in the way of theories. And sometimes time can be a killer, like in this next case. Number 3. Brianna Maitland. The year was 2004, and Brianna Maitland was making ends meet in Burlington, Vermont. The 17-year-old had recently left her parents' farm and started at a new high school. However, her housing situation was unsettled, so she dropped out of school, got a job at a local inn, and moved in with a childhood friend. She was trying to complete her GED but was getting into trouble, having recently been attacked by a former friend at a party. She got away with a concussion, cuts, and a broken nose. The other girl had a criminal complaint filed against her, but no one saw what was coming next. It was March 19, 2004, and things were looking up for Maitland. She had just taken her GED exam, had lunch with her mother Kelly, and went shopping. At some stage, Brianna noticed something and left the store they were in. She returned later, seeming nervous and shaken. She excused herself, saying she needed to head to work at the Black Lantern Inn and was dropped off at her friend's home. She left a note for her roommate before driving to work in an Oldsmobile owned by her mother. She reportedly had a normal shift of work before driving off, preparing for her second job the next day. It was the last time anyone would ever hear from Brianna Maitland. The next afternoon, a Vermont State Police trooper was sent to check out something unusual. A car had plowed into the side of an abandoned house. The old wooden house was an unconventional local landmark, and it was hard to miss the Oldsmobile in the wall, a piece of plywood covering the car's trunk. An investigation soon found all of the evidence of Maitland's presence: a cigarette, a water bottle, and even 2 of her paychecks still in the car. Wherever Brianna had gone, she had left in a hurry. The police didn't know this was a missing persons case yet and classed it as a drunk driving incident. They impounded the car and took it to a local garage. Because Maitland wasn't expected to be on her way to St. Albans that day, her absence didn't raise any alarms right away. She wasn't reported missing for several days. Her mother didn't even learn her car had been impounded until 5 days later, and her roommate had been away for the weekend. No one grew concerned until the start of the following week. After calling around to friends and family with no luck, her mother Kelly finally filed a missing persons report. Only then did the pieces start falling into place, revealing a more disturbing picture than anyone had expected. But by then it was already too late, and the trail was growing cold. Maitland's parents provided photos of their daughter to the police, and they identified the car. Kelly stated that she didn't believe her daughter was the one who had crashed it. Soon, witnesses started coming in saying that they had saw the car but didn't see anyone in it. One reported seeing the turn signal on, which might indicate it had been recently abandoned. A further investigation of the car revealed that many of Maitland's personal items were still in the car, including her glasses and her migraine medication. While police initially thought Maitland might have been a runaway, They reclassified it as a case of foul play. But that turned the question to one thing: who would want to kidnap Breonna Maitland? Maitland's parents believed she might have been taken by a gang. She was a trained martial artist and could have fought off one kidnapper. A weapon was launched asking for tips and offering a reward of $20,000, and sure enough, information started coming in. But the question was, would any of it be credible? One claimed that she was being held against her will in a rented house in Berkshire. The house was raided by police and they found 2 drug dealers from New York, along with a large amount of drugs and paraphernalia, but there was no sign of Breonna. However, it was subsequently discovered that Breonna had been purchasing drugs from the duo before her disappearance, and questions around the men continued to circle. The dealers Ramon L. Ryans and Nathaniel Charles Jackson became the prime suspects. An anonymous woman sent in a disturbing affidavit claiming to know that they kidnapped and murdered Breonna and provided details of the case. However, police were unable to corroborate any of it, and the duo was never charged with causing any harm to Breonna. Over the months, people would call the Maitland family claiming to know details of their daughter's death. But was it someone trying to bring a grieving family closure, or a sadist obsessed with the case? And not only was there no evidence of the killing, there was no evidence Breonna was dead. The next big clue in the case came in 2006 when a woman who looked a lot like Breonna was seen on camera at an Atlantic City casino. However, she was never officially identified. 8 years after the disappearance, police investigated a connection to serial killer Israel Keyes, who had been active in Vermont. Keyes was ruled as a suspect not long after he died. The case grew cold, but it didn't die. In 2016, police found new DNA samples in the car, and as late as 2022, they had identified someone linked to the DNA. The person has never been identified, but they were reportedly cooperating with police. And while the authorities and Breonna's family remain active as they seek answers, the young woman at the center of the case has never been seen again. A teenage girl disappearing happens all too often. But what about a famous judge? Number 2. Joseph Force Crater. Judges hold some of the most powerful positions in the United States, holding the fate of defendants in their hands and presiding over massive lawsuits. And for a few, they rise to even higher heights, sitting on appeals and Supreme Courts. So how could one of those towering figures simply vanish? That's exactly what happened in 1930, when Judge Joseph Force Crater disappeared in one of the most infamous disappearances in New York State history. But there were plenty of strange signs about the judge long before that. Joseph Crater, the son of Irish immigrants, was always an ambitious man. When he saw something he wanted, he did what it took to get it. He once helped his significant other get a divorce and then married her only 7 days after it was finalized. With this level of ambition, it's no surprise he became a powerful attorney. He was part of the Tammany Hall political machine, which gave him access to some incredibly powerful figures. They included the then Governor Franklin Delano Roosevelt, who appointed him as a justice of the New York Supreme Court for New York County. It seemed like his trajectory was headed in one direction, up, but it was about to come to a shocking halt. Some interesting details would come to light about Force Crater's appointment to the higher court, including $20,000 of bank withdrawals and liquidating of his assets that happened shortly prior. Could he have bought his way into a judgeship? It wasn't clear, but corruption was infamous in Tammany Hall at the time, and the power brokers would be investigated heavily in the years to come. But in July of 1930, Force Crater and his family had something else on their mind: a vacation. The whole clan was headed to their summer cabin in Belgrade, Maine. But midway through the rest and relaxation, things took a sinister turn. Crater got a phone call that seemed to alarm him, and he told his wife that he had to return to New York to straighten those fellows out. Eyewitnesses said he did return to New York and then went to Atlantic City with a showgirl named Sally Lou Ritz. He returned to Maine on August 1st, but left after only 2 days, promising his wife that he would be back to celebrate her birthday in 6 days' time. He seemed fine when he left, but when he arrived in New York, he spent hours going through files in his chambers, destroying documents, and having his law clerk cash checks for over $5,000. He and his clerk would then transport locked briefcases back to his apartment. Crater gave his clerk the night off before he reserved a ticket for a Broadway show and had dinner with a friend. And this would be the last time anyone saw Judge Crater alive. The judge was trusted with his own affairs, so it was a while before anyone knew he was missing. He didn't return to Maine, and his wife reached out to friends in New York, but it was only then that people started asking odd questions about his last night. Why did he buy tickets to a show he had reportedly already seen? His dining partners couldn't agree on whether he had taken a taxi or walked away after dinner. And what was all that money for? When he didn't reappear for the reopening of courts in New York on August 25th, everyone realized something was very wrong. But it may have been too late for answers. Police were finally brought in and quickly discovered more unusual things. The judge's safe deposit box was empty, and the briefcases were missing. The judge's disappearance was front-page news, and thousands of tips came flooding in. This only complicated matters as most of them had little or false information. As the investigation wore on, it became clear that Judge Forrest Crater had been living a double life. He socialized with showgirls and was likely carrying on multiple affairs. All the ones that could be found were interviewed, but none of them knew where he had gone, and none were implicated in the disappearance. Which means all that was left was theories. A grand jury wasn't able to lay any charges because there was no proof that the judge was alive or dead. A lawyer hired for Crater's wife implicated one showgirl, June Bryce. It was claimed that she was part of a scheme to blackmail the judge, and the judge was ultimately killed by her gangster boyfriend. And this became part of a pattern. Every lead went back to the various showgirls, with many of them having links to the mob. His jacket was reportedly found in the apartment of a sex worker, Vivian Gordon, who was linked to infamous mobster Jack Legs Gordon. But no answers would be coming, as she was murdered 5 days after her first interview with the police. This would turn into a larger scandal, bringing down a police officer who had been sleeping with her and the mayor who let the corruption flourish under his nose. But hard answers wouldn't be coming anytime soon. Crater's wife would find envelopes containing checks, stocks, and bonds in the house 6 months later, but nothing led to the judge's whereabouts. The most common theory is that he was murdered, either by a gangster that he had crossed or by someone trying to blackmail him, possibly with information about how he got his judgeship. Crater would ultimately be declared legally dead 9 years after his disappearance, and the case would be closed 40 years later. But a break in the case would possibly come in 2005, when a 91-year-old woman penned a letter before her death claiming that her husband, along with an NYPD officer and his cabbie brother, had killed Crater. The judge's burial site was supposedly below the boardwalk in Coney Island, and nothing was found. And so it was proven that even a famous man can vanish without a trace. But no case sent shockwaves through an entire nation like this one. Number 1. The Beaumont children. During the 80s and 90s, a wave of child vanishings made the United States pivot from free-range parenting to helicopter parenting. But long before that, Australia was dealing with a terrible case of their own. It was 1966, and the Beaumont family was celebrating Australia Day on Glenelg Beach near Adelaide. The charming South Australian town was a popular vacation spot, and parents Grant and Nancy had taken their children, Jane, Arna, and Grant, on a January beach vacation. Grant had to go on a business trip, so he dropped the children off at the beach and they had a great day. The next morning, they asked their mother if they could visit again. It was only a 5-minute bus ride away. She agreed, letting the eldest child, Jane, lead the way. It was the last time that she would ever see her children. They were expected home on the noon bus but never arrived. When they didn't return home on the next bus, she told her husband upon his return, and he raced down to the beach. There was no sign of the children. They reported the disappearance to the police, who searched the beach and the streets. The search soon expanded, and within a day, the entire nation was aware of the hunt. Many feared the worst. Had the children been kidnapped by a sinister criminal? Were they even still alive? Surprisingly, the initial reward was only $250 Australian dollars, and soon the tips came rolling in. A woman told the police that she had spoken to 3 kids who matched the description that day, and the nearby Padawalonga boat haven was drained to check if they had drowned. There was no sign of the children, but police soon started to zero in on one suspect. Several witnesses claimed to have seen the Beaumont children in nearby Cully Reserve, accompanied by a tall man in his 30s. The children seemed to be having fun. However, the man was acting cold, asking if anyone had seen the children's money. But the parents were skeptical. Their oldest daughter was shy and cautious, and she didn't believe that they would go with a strange man willingly. A nearby shop owner claimed that Jane had bought a meat pie from him, which would have cost more than her mother had given her that day. Who was the mysterious man? Sightings of the children continued for the next year, as people reported seeing them in unusual situations, such as one woman claiming she saw them entering an abandoned house. As the case attracted international attention, a Dutch psychic named Gerard Coisset arrived in Australia claiming to offer help. However, he was largely seen as an ineffective nuisance, falsely identifying a burial place where nothing was found. It would not be the last hoax, nor the most unsettling. 2 years after the disappearance, the Beaumonts received 2 letters, one claiming to be Jane and the other the kidnapper. The writer offered to exchange the children, but the handover turned out to be a fake. Another letter soon arrived claiming that he had abandoned the exchange because a detective was present. The letters would eventually be identified as fakes decades later. But the mystery would drag on, and there would be many suspects. Who took the children? The police focused their investigation on known bad actors, many of which were already in prison. Bevan Spencer von Einem was serving a life sentence for murder and reportedly had information about the Beaumonts, but he refused to talk. Arthur Stanley Brown was accused of killing two sisters in 1998, but died while awaiting trial and was considered too old to be the man who was seen. Other suspects were either too young or too old to be the man seen, or weren't likely to be near the site of the disappearance. The most credible suspect was Harry Phipps. A local factory owner and social figure who was estranged son identified him as a possible suspect in 2013. Almost 10 years after Phipps's death, he claimed to have seen the children with his father decades before. Two other witnesses claimed Phipps had hired them to dig a hole in the factory yard. This led to the excavation of the factory, but no remains were found, and there would be no closure for anyone involved. To this day, the case is considered unsolved. Both parents have since passed on, eventually divorcing and living separately as they tried to escape the scrutiny of the case. Over the years, more and more Australians claimed the children should never have been unsupervised, and with a case this prominent and this controversial, it's inevitable that conspiracies would emerge, with people claiming that the children had been kidnapped to New Zealand by a religious cult. Even more upsetting to many was when a newspaper published computer-generated pictures of what the children would look like as adults in 1990. It ripped open the still unhealed wound in the fabric of Australia, but even today it remains completely unsolved. A woman was killed on an empty train car, with no one else going in or out. A mysterious deadly illness that defies diagnosis. A missing man was found at the top of a 10-foot pile of coal. In each case, someone died, but the exact circumstances of their death defy explanation. Was it an assassin? Alien abduction? No one can say for sure, but many have certainly tried. Today, we're taking a look at some of the most bizarre, compelling, mysterious deaths that we just can't explain. Number 1. Alexander the Great. Alexander III of Macedon, also known as Alexander the Great, conquered lands from Macedonia to Egypt, Greece, and parts of India. But he couldn't conquer whatever mysterious health condition killed him at the age of 32. After returning to Babylon from an unsuccessful campaign in India, Alexander was not feeling great. After a night of drinking, he came down with a fever that grew worse and worse as the days wore on. Eventually, all he could do was lie in bed. 10 days after the fever first came on, he was dead. Other accounts report a sudden sharp pain in his abdomen, and most accounts agree that Alexander's body did not show any signs of decay for 6 days after his death. To witnesses at the time, this was evidence that Alexander was more than a mere man, and he possessed some godlike powers. Today, his death is the source of spirited debate among medical professionals and historians. At the time of his death, no one suspected Alexander was poisoned. However, he had accumulated plenty of enemies during his lifetime, any of whom might have had good reason to poison him. Graham Phillips suggested in his book, Alexander the Great: Murder in Babylon, that it could be strychnine poisoning. However, this poison does not cause a fever and causes convulsions, which were not described in any accounts of Alexander's death. Leo Shep suggested hellebore, which could have been mixed with wine. Some historians have suggested necrotizing pancreatitis, while others have brought up the possibility of West Nile virus or malaria, which he could have picked up on his travels. There is one other potential explanation that has gained traction in recent years, one that would be especially troubling. Dr. Catherine Hall, a senior lecturer at the Dunedin School of Medicine at the University of Otago, New Zealand, proposed that the paralysis described during his illness is indicative of Guillain-Barré syndrome, a neurological disorder. She additionally raised the possibility that as the paralysis progressed, his breathing became less apparent. This led to his doctors declaring him dead, when according to her theory, he was still alive. She believes that he may have been alive during those 6 days during which he did not show any signs of decay. His death may have been the most famous case of pseudo-thanatos, or false diagnosis of death, ever recorded. Number 2. Natalie Wood. Hollywood is filled with mysteries that rival those seen on the silver screen. One of the most enduring Hollywood mysteries is the death of the beloved actress Natalie Wood. On November 29, 1981, the 43-year-old Natalie Wood was found floating face down in the ocean off the coast of Catalina Island. At the time, the death was ruled accidental, attributed to a combination of drinking and her inability to swim. However, in 2011, the Los Angeles County Sheriff's Office reopened the investigation after years of speculation that her death could have been the result of a homicide. In 2013, her cause of death was changed from accidental drowning to drowning and other undetermined factors. Some of the details that muddied the waters of her death included bruises on her arms and knees, as well as a scratch on her neck, indicating she might have been attacked before she drowned. It's also difficult to get a clear picture of the events of November 28, 1981, with conflicting statements regarding whether she had argued with her husband, Robert Wagner, on the yacht where she was last seen before disappearing. Some detectives had suggested that Wagner knew more about the incident than he let on while talking to authorities, but his attorney has vehemently denied this, despite the new concerns raised by the reopened investigation and a great deal of pressure from the true crime enthusiasts. The department was not able to determine whether Natalie Wood's death was indeed the result of a crime or just a tragic accident. Number 3. Zygmunt Adamski. In June 1980, a 56-year-old miner named Zygmunt Adamski vanished from his home in Tingley, West Yorkshire. 5 days later, Adamski's body was found at a coal yard in Todmorden, 5 miles from his home. The body was on top of a 10-foot-high pile of coal, and he was wearing a suit, but his shirt, watch, and wallet were missing. His hair had been cut short, but the most unusual thing about Zygmunt Adamski's body was that it was covered in burn marks on the head, neck, and shoulders. The burns were covered in some sort of ointment, but their exact nature could not be identified. Alan Godfrey, the police officer who arrived on the scene, said that Adamski's face was frozen in an expression of absolute horror. "Those eyes were staring up at me. I was looking down on him from a foot away. Those eyes sent a shudder down my spine. They were wide open. He had the look of someone who had seen something or someone that had scared him to death." According to BBC Inside Out, James Turnbull, the coroner who examined Adamski's body, considers it to be the biggest mystery of his career. One of the most bizarre aspects of the body, aside from its location and the burns, was the fact that Adamski had only 1 day's worth of beard growth, despite having been missing for 5 days. The case was filled with unanswered questions and riddles that would never be solved. Where was he when he was missing? What killed him? And how did he get on top of that coal pile? Some blamed Adamski's family, others pointed their fingers at the KGB. There were even those who attributed the disappearance and death to alien abduction. Whether Adamski was taken by foreign intelligence, an ordinary enemy, or something altogether inhuman, we will likely never know exactly what happened. Number 4. Dr. Gilbert Bogle and Margaret Chandler. In the early hours of the morning on New Year's Day, 1963, 2 boys were walking near the Lane Cove River in Sydney, Australia, and spotted a man lying face down on the ground. At first glance, they thought he was just another partygoer from the night before who had a bit too much to drink and passed out. But when they walked by the area again an hour and a half later, they saw that his face had turned purple. They called the police, who arrived on scene to find the man naked from the waist down, with his suit trousers placed over his lower half and covered by a carpet. His name was Dr. Gilbert Bogle, and he was dead. 10 meters away on the riverbank, they found another half-naked body, this one belonging to a woman named Margaret Chandler. Both pairs of underwear were found nearby. Margaret and Dr. Bogle had clearly come here together. This was rather scandalous, as the two were married, and not to each other. The authorities had never seen anything like this, a couple sneaking off to the lover's lane by the river, getting halfway undressed, and then being interrupted by something that left them both dead. Neither of them were injured, and nothing unusual turned up in the autopsy. No distinct cause of death could be determined, leaving the authorities with their best guess. Suspicion first fell on Jeffrey, Margaret's husband, but not only did they turn out to have an open marriage, but he was with his own girlfriend all night. The presence of vomit and excrement near the body suggested poison might have played a part, and that the burden of finding some evidence fell on the toxicologist. But they could not determine anything other than one fact: whatever killed one killed the other, and at the same time. The 2006 documentary Who Killed Dr. Bogle and Mrs. Chandler suggested another possibility: asphyxiation from hydrogen sulfide in the river. This toxic gas, which was emanating from the mud due to the dumping of waste in the area, was identified by a Maritime Services Board called to investigate the pollution. The gas is heavier than air, and it would have been more present at ground level. If someone was lying in it, they could asphyxiate and die without realizing what was happening. Still, that's just one theory of many, and the precise cause of Bogle and Chandler's deaths may never be uncovered. Number 5. Amelia Earhart. Amelia Earhart is one of the most famous pilots and women in history. She's remembered for her aviation records and for being the first female pilot to fly alone across the Atlantic Ocean. Unfortunately, that's not all she's famous for. On June 1, 1937, she and her navigator Fred Noonan left Oakland, California for their transcontinental flight. While flying over the Pacific Ocean, Earhart and Noonan's plane disappeared. No one could locate any trace of them or their plane, and Earhart was declared dead on January 5, 1939. No definitive conclusions about Earhart's fate have ever been reached, but of course there have been plenty of theories, some more realistic than others. One theory posits that Earhart was a spy for the US government and was taken prisoner by Japanese forces while trying to collect intelligence. Another more widely accepted theory is that Earhart and Noonan reached the island of Nikamororo and died there. A heel from a woman's shoe, an aluminum panel, and a piece of curved glass have all been found on the island. These might have belonged to Earhart and her plane, but we may never know for sure. Number 6. Charles Francis Hall. In 1870, Charles Francis Hall led an expedition to the North Pole. The team received $50,000 from Congress, and their ship Polaris left Connecticut on July 3, 1871. As the ship continued north, tensions brewed among the crew, particularly between Hall and the sailing master, Sidney Buddington, as well as a doctor and natural scientist, Emil Bessels. In October, Polaris came to a stop. In November, after a 2-week scouting expedition, Hall returned to the ship and drank a cup of coffee. He quickly became ill and accused the other officers of poisoning him. On November 8th, he was dead, buried in a shallow grave. The remaining crew would never reach the North Pole as Captain Buddington had run the Polaris aground. After the crew members returned to New York, the Navy Board of Inquiry investigated Hall's death and determined that he had died of apoplectic seizure. But in 1968, Chauncey C. Loomis, who was writing a biography of Hall at the time, traveled to his grave. There, he was able to take samples of hair and fingernails and have them tested. The tests showed an intake of considerable amounts of arsenic by C.F. Hall in the last 2 weeks of his life. Loomis wrote that if Hall was murdered, Emil Bessels is the prime subject. However, arsenic was also found in many medicines during that time period, and it's entirely possible that if Hall was poisoned, he unknowingly did it to himself. In both cases, those ifs are doing a lot of heavy lifting. Number 7. Dyatlov Pass Hikers. On January 23, 1959, 10 hikers led by Igor Dyatlov trudged into the Ural Mountains in Russia. One of them had to turn back after a medical emergency, but the remaining 9 continued, planning to send word back after 3 weeks. On February 20th, no one had heard from the group, and a search party was sent out to look for them. When the search party finally tracked down the missing hikers, they found a gruesome scene. 5 of the hikers' bodies were spread out across the snow in various states of undress. One was missing part of his own knuckle, which appeared to have been bitten off, perhaps self-inflicted. After the snow melted, the final 4 bodies were found. Their injuries were equally bizarre. One of the hikers had a twisted neck, one had a fractured skull, 2 were missing their eyes, and 1 was missing her tongue. It was clear at first glance that they had died from hypothermia, and the snow that had collapsed their tent was from some sort of compelling natural force. But the plot soon thickened. Some of the hikers' clothing contained traces of radiation, leading some to speculate that weapons testing had been involved in the disaster that killed them. Other theories have included the CIA, the FBI, Yetis, aliens, but the most plausible theory, a slab avalanche that fell on the tent. However, slab avalanches usually occur at steeper inclines than the one in Dyatlov Pass. So even though the slab avalanche theory is a compelling possibility, the case is far from closed. Number 8. Letitia Thoreau. Fans of the murder mystery genre might be familiar with the trope of the locked room murder, which, as the name implies, occurs in a locked room with no apparent way for the killer to get in or go out. It's ordinarily the stuff of fiction. But in 1937, the Paris Metro's first-class car saw a locked room murder that was all too real. Letitia Thoreau was a 29-year-old Italian immigrant who had lived in Paris for over a decade. She was a widow who had once been married to a high-society man, Jules. Jules kept her a secret during their 6-year marriage, and his parents only learned of her existence after his death. Letitia had secrets of her own, too. She was a double agent, working with the Paris police to infiltrate La Cagoule, a fascist terrorist group. Before her death, La Cagoule began to expect Letitia was a mole. On her last night alive, Letitia boarded the Paris Metro for the ride home, sitting alone in a first-class car at the Porte de Charenton station. The next stop, Porte Dorée, was 45 seconds away. By the time the train reached that stop, Letitia Thoreau was on death's door. She was on the floor with a 9-inch knife in her neck and died on the way to the hospital. According to the train driver, she was the only one in the metro car. It is possible that La Cagoule sent Jean Filiol, one of their assassins, after her. But if that was the case, how did he get into the train car without being seen, stab her in the neck, and escape, all in only 45 seconds? It's like something out of an Agatha Christie novel, but without Hercule Poirot arriving to provide a neat explanation before the final page. Number 9. Elisa Lam. Few modern unsolved deaths have drawn as much wild speculation as the tragic disappearance of Elisa Lam. On January 31, 2013, the 21-year-old Elisa Lam vanished from the infamous Cecil Hotel in downtown Los Angeles. When her parents didn't hear from her, they contacted the Los Angeles Police Department. No one could find any trace of Elisa until they checked the security footage. The video showed Elisa acting strangely in one of the hotel's elevators. She stepped into the elevator and pushed all of the buttons, and then began to step in and out of the elevator, peeking out into the hallway. In the final part of the footage, she could be seen standing near the left side of the door, gesticulating wildly and appearing to have an intense conversation with someone who was not in the frame. 2 weeks after the video was published, hotel guests began to complain about low water pressure and a strange, unpleasant taste in the tap water. A maintenance worker named Santiago Lopez investigated the source of the problem and found Elisa Lam's body floating in a hotel water tank. Her death was ruled an accidental drowning, but many questions were left unanswered. How did she get into the tank in the first place? Was she alone? The autopsy did not show any signs of foul play, and it's highly possible that Elisa was suffering from a mental health crisis. But it would have taken a great deal of effort for her to wind up in a water tank if the drowning was self-inflicted. To reach the tank that she was found in, Lopez had to take the elevator to the 15th floor and walk up a staircase to the roof. He had to turn off the rooftop alarm and climb onto a platform where the water tanks were kept. Next, he had to climb another ladder to reach the top of the main tank. It would have been difficult for Elisa to reach this location without setting off an alarm or drawing any attention to herself. Elisa Lam's death is far from the only dark mystery attached to the Cecil Hotel. The building has seen more than its fair share of deaths and supposed hauntings, as well as serial killers, such as Richard Ramirez. The story of Elisa Lam is one of the many horrors seen by the Cecil Hotel that will likely never be explained. Number 10. The South Pole Poisoning. In May of 2000, a 32-year-old astrophysicist named Rodney Marks was walking from a research building to the main base of the Amundsen Scott South Pole Station when he suddenly began to have difficulty breathing. His vision began to blur, and he felt a rush of intense fatigue. He went to bed hoping a good night's sleep would help. But at 5:30 a.m., he woke up vomiting blood. Throughout the day, his symptoms only worsened, his joints ached, his eyes were incredibly sensitive to light, and he became increasingly distressed to the point of hyperventilation. The station doctor gave him an antipsychotic to calm down. It didn't help. Marks went into cardiac arrest and was declared dead at 6:45 p.m. on May 12, 2000. Dr. Thompson believed the death to be the result of unknown but natural causes. The rest of the researchers at the base would have to wait until the body could be collected for an autopsy if they wanted more answers. Marks's body was kept in the base's storage, where the cold preserved the condition of the corpse. On October 30th, a plane was finally able to carry the body to Christchurch, New Zealand, where Dr. Martin Sage performed an autopsy. It was then that he made a startling discovery. Marks had not died of natural causes. He had ingested 150 milliliters of methanol, a sweet, colorless, and toxic type of alcohol used to clean scientific equipment at the base. The dose he had consumed was fatal. This left only a few possibilities, none of them pleasant. Marks could have killed himself, but his colleagues rejected that notion. But if he hadn't poisoned himself, then someone else was responsible. In 2008, coroner Richard McElray released a report that said it could not be determined one way or another whether the death was the result of foul play. Marks had no enemies at the station, as far as anyone knew, nor did he have a reason to attempt suicide. No suspect has ever been identified, and Antarctica remains a continent that has never seen a murder trial. Number 11. Karen Silkwood. On November 13, 1974, Karen Silkwood was discovered deceased in her car near Crescent, Oklahoma. Silkwood, a chemical technician and an advocate for labor unions, appeared to have collided with a culvert, resulting in her death. Initially deemed a straightforward case of falling asleep at the wheel, questions lingered. Silkwood had been employed at the Kerr-McGee Cimarron fuel fabrication site where she manufactured plutonium pellets for nuclear reactor fuel rods. Concerned about workplace safety, she joined the Oil, Chemical, and Atomic Workers Union. In July 1974, she discovered she had been contaminated with plutonium, and it turned out that she was the only person in her lab to test positive. Convinced this was no coincidence, she delved deeper into Kerr-McGee's practices, uncovering health violations, worker contamination, and unsafe equipment. Amid mounting stress, her doctor prescribed Quaaludes. Undeterred, Silkwood persisted in her efforts to expose corruption within the company. On November 5, 1974, during a routine self-check, she found almost 400 times the legal limit of plutonium in her body. She was sent home, and her plutonium levels continued to rise. The company accused Silkwood of poisoning herself, and an investigation found high levels of radiation in her home. Silkwood was terrified, believing that the company was trying to kill her. On November 13th, she drove to Oklahoma City and met with New York Times journalist David Burnham, as well as a union leader. She had a binder full of evidence which she took with her on her way to a union meeting. She was finally going to blow the whistle on Kerr-McGee, but she never got the chance. After her crash, the documents had seemingly vanished from the car. Police determined that Silkwood was asleep at the wheel and under the influence of Quaaludes, but her family, friends, and private investigators disagreed, pointing to skid marks as evidence that she was awake during the crash. The precise details of Silkwood's death and whether it was a drug-induced accident or corporate assassination are unknown to this day. Number 12. Edgar Allan Poe. Edgar Allan Poe's The Murders in the Rue Morgue is regarded by many as the first detective story. His writing is famous for spinning dark tales of death, vengeance, and mystique. However, there is one mystery associated with Poe that he had no hand in writing: his own death. On October 3, 1849, Poe arrived at a Baltimore tavern looking worse for wear. He was dazed and confused, dressed in what appeared to be someone else's clothes. A local doctor was notified and Poe was admitted to a nearby hospital. He was delirious, hallucinating, and calling out for a still unidentified Reynolds. On October 7th, he died, and a Baltimore newspaper reported his cause of death as congestion of the brain. This is just vague enough of an explanation to invite numerous theories in the years since his death. Some believe that his death was alcohol-induced. Biographer E. Oak Smith posed a theory in 1867 that Poe was beaten until he suffered from swelling of the brain. In 1999, public health researcher Albert Donay proposed that Poe died from carbon monoxide poisoning, caused by the coal gas used for indoor lighting in the 19th century. In a similar vein, Chris Sempner, curator of the Poe Museum in Richmond, has suggested mercury poisoning as a possibility, which would explain Poe's hallucinations prior to death. Other popular theories include a brain tumor, influenza, and even murder at the hands of his fiancée's brothers. While some theories have gained more traction than others, it is likely that the mystery of Poe's death shall be solved nevermore. Number 13. Elizabeth Short, the Black Dahlia. It was January 1947 at around 10 in the morning, and Betty Bersinger was pushing her daughter's stroller through Leimert Park in Los Angeles when she stumbled onto a horror show. There was a naked woman's body cut at the waist, lying on the ground next to the sidewalk. The sides of her mouth were carved into a permanent smile. An autopsy determined that the woman had died from blows to the face and blood loss. The cuts to her face and bisection of her torso mercifully had happened after her death. The woman was identified as 22-year-old Elizabeth Short, known to some as the Black Dahlia, a reference to her love of black dresses and the recent film The Blue Dahlia. The name quickly caught on, and soon the press was spreading the word about the Black Dahlia murder. The police found it difficult to pin down a subject. One potential killer, Robert Manley, had an alibi that checked out. Then an envelope containing Short's belongings, such as her birth certificate, social security card, and address book, was mailed to the examiner's office. A botched investigation of another suspect, Leslie Dillon, led to a lawsuit against the city. Dozens of writers and amateur sleuths had attempted to crack the case over the years, but Elizabeth Short's killer, the person capable of committing such a brutal crime and staging that horrific display, has never been found. Number 14. Lily Lindstrom and the Atlas Vampire. We've seen unsolved deaths surrounded by speculation about ghosts, aliens, even a Yeti. But what about a vampire? Odd as it may seem, the details of one infamous unsolved Swedish murder earned it the nickname the Atlas Vampire Murder. In 1932, a concerned woman named Minnie Jansen called the police about her downstairs neighbor, Lily Lindstrom. She hadn't heard from Lily and was growing concerned. Lindstrom was a sex worker who saw clients in her apartment. and Minnie was worried something terrible had happened. Unfortunately, she was right. When the police entered the apartment, they found Lily naked, face down on the bed, and dead. The cause of death was from head trauma with repeated blows from a blunt object. That was bad enough, but most of Lily's blood had been drained from her body. Saliva was found on the neck and the body, and that, along with a blood-stained ladle, led authorities to fear that the assailant had decided to drink Lily's blood. Authorities interrogated her clients, but none confessed, and they never found her killer or what happened to all that blood. Number 15. JonBenet Ramsey. One of the most shocking murder cases in recent history is that of 6-year-old pageant princess JonBenet Ramsey, who was found strangled to death on December 26, 1996. From the beginning, the case has been shrouded in mystery. On the night of JonBenet's death, the only people known to be in the house with her were her parents, John and Patricia, and her older brother, Burke, who was 9 years old at the time. When the family woke up the morning after Christmas Day, Patricia, also known as Patsy, claimed to find a ransom note written in Sharpie. It demanded a ransom of $118,000 in exchange for JonBenet. The note was highly unusual as far as ransom notes go. First of all, the monetary amount named in the note precisely matched the amount awarded in a recent bonus of John's. That note was longer than most ransom notes and filled 3 pages. After searching the house, John found JonBenet's body. The Ramseys had woken up to a kidnapping and discovered a murder instead. The murder of JonBenet Ramsey has never been solved. Over the years, numerous suspects have been proposed, from her family members to some sort of mystery assailant that broke into the house. According to People, in 2008, the district attorney wrote to John to inform him that he, Patsy, and Burke had been cleared of suspicion via DNA evidence. However, the DA that followed him, Stan Garnett, told People, "I didn't feel the exoneration was warranted based on the state of the evidence and the complexity of the case." Other theories point to the ransom note and the potential for a killer from outside the Ramsey family. One suspect was Michael Helgath, whose boots seemed to match a print found at the scene of the crime. However, Helgath died by suicide in 1997, and that particular trial went cold. Several individuals have attempted to confess to the crime, but no solid evidence has linked them to the murder. There are hopes that advances in DNA-based investigation may eventually lead to an answer, but it's entirely possible that the murder of JonBenet will never be solved. Number 16. 8-Day Bride. Weddings are meant to be joyous occasions, a celebration of love, and the start of a lifelong commitment between two people swearing to cherish one another. But for some couples, till death do us part comes true far too soon. Jack and Christina Kettlewell were married in secret on May 12, 1947. Christina's family did not approve of the match and were even more concerned when Jack's best friend Ronnie accompanied the couple on their honeymoon. On May 17th, Christina and Jack moved into a cottage in Severn Falls, Ontario. 3 days later, only 8 days after the wedding, Christina was found in her pajamas, floating face down in 9 inches of river water. She had drowned. Behind her, the cottage was going up in flames. There were no visible wounds or burns on Christina's body to suggest a struggle or that she had been caught in the fire. Suspicion immediately fell on Ronnie, who had taken out life insurance policies on both Jack and Christina prior to their elopement. The plot thickens when Jack gives a statement to the police that suggests that he and Ronnie are lovers, and the tale only got more twisted from there. A suicide letter emerged, supposedly written from Christina to Ronnie, claiming that she had tried to kill herself with poison out of fear that she and Jack would never marry. There was another letter that grew more frantic, and finally a third letter written the day before her death. "Ronnie is in the boat outside somewhere," it said. "By the time he gets back, everything will be all over with. He must have been afraid something would happen because he is staying an extra day to ensure we return to Toronto with him." Jack's son Richard never believed this version of the story. He insisted that Ronnie had been the mastermind of a scheme to get rid of Christina. The jury in the case was unable to determine whether foul play was responsible for her death, and the case was left open. The only 3 people who can say for sure what happened that day are dead and buried now, and the truth is buried with them. Did you ever hear this story about the Yale-educated mass murderer with possible CIA connections who vanished into thin air? What about the missing British kids whose extreme poverty rendered them almost invisible? And who could forget the original milk carton kid who may or may not have been sold into slavery by a nasty network of kidnappers who would be accused of working with secret agencies in campaigns to compromise government officials? The American milk carton kid, Johnny Gosch. One of the scariest images in modern history is that of the milk carton kids. The very thought of a child's face on a milk carton conjures up images of serial killers, of kids growing up locked in basements, perhaps the prisoners of a network of adults with similar depraved interests. According to FBI data, 359,094 people between the ages of 0 and 17 were reported missing in 2022. The kids who never returned cast a dark shadow over society, such as little John David Gosh, the paper boy from Iowa who went missing on September 5, 1982. He never officially returned, but that's a complicated story. We'll explain what we mean by that in a minute or two. He was one of the first milk carton kids, and his case still remains open today. That September, he went missing in his suburb of West Des Moines. Johnny was 12, doing his daily paper route for the Des Moines Register. At about 6 a.m., a woman thought she heard Johnny as she usually did when he took a shortcut through her yard. His newspaper wagon would always rattle and sometimes wake her up. Johnny was seen by several people that morning, including other paper boys picking up their papers at the drop-off point. Johnny was hard to miss this morning since he'd taken Gretchen with him, the family's miniature dachshund. He was at the paper drop when another paper boy saw him talking to a man, an older guy stocky in build. He was driving a silver or two-toned blue Ford Fairmont. A police report later described the driver as a white male in his 30s, possibly having a mustache and somewhat dark complexion. A witness said the man stopped the car, reversed a bit, and asked Johnny for directions to 86th Street. Johnny then told the witness what the man wanted. That witness, John Rossi, said he saw the car's license plate, but he's never been able to recall exactly what it was. Another paper boy saw Johnny. He said he saw a man on foot close to Johnny. He heard the Ford speed away at one point, and the man on foot was gone. Johnny's paper wagon was in the street, but Johnny was gone. Given the witness accounts, there was almost certainly a driver and a man who grabbed Johnny in the street. The abduction seemed like a well-rehearsed plan. John and Noreen Gosh, Johnny's parents, soon got calls from neighbors telling them Johnny hadn't delivered their papers that morning. They went out looking for him only to find his paper wagon still full about 2 blocks from where they lived. Johnny had vanished. When Mrs. Gosh called the police station, they told her not to worry. She waited nervously at home as Mr. Gosh delivered Johnny's newspapers. Something just wasn't right. Johnny would not have left his wagon like that. After about an hour, police arrived at the house and took a statement from Mrs. Gosh. Johnny was only declared missing after 72 hours. This was in line with policy, but it's often argued that 72 hours is way too long to wait in certain cases. In fact, the first few hours are when all the breadcrumbs are still scattered around. Time is of the essence, but since 99% of kids turn up, police can sometimes be reluctant to go out chasing shadows. When they did finally start asking questions about Johnny, they heard a tall man on 42nd Street had followed him. Mrs. Gosh was sure Johnny had been kidnapped. She had very little trust in the Des Moines police force. The police chief was corrupt, she later told the media. I know a lot more about him. What she meant by that was the fact that in 1951 the future chief and some other kids had kidnapped a teenage boy after beating the hell out of him. The chief was jailed for 30 days as a young offender. He later joined the Marines, and in 1976 he became the head of West Des Moines Police Department. Mrs. Gosh dug deeper. She just didn't believe the police had taken her son's disappearance seriously. Over the years, she would say there had been a big conspiracy to take her son that could have included the police and even the CIA. We'll get to that soon. She discovered that in 1982, the Des Moines Tribune had published an article about the West Des Moines Police Department. 14 of 20 officers who were interviewed said the chief had once beaten a handcuffed person. They explained that he once compromised a burglary investigation because his own son was involved. He'd been drunk on the job many times, and he'd occasionally threatened his own officers. There was a subsequent investigation. The chief came out of it in good shape. 2 of the whistleblowers were fired. It was as if a higher power was protecting the chief. Mrs. Gosh had said something frightened her 2 days before Johnny went missing. The family had been at a Valley High School football game to watch Johnny's older brother play. Johnny went off to buy some popcorn, but was away for a while. His dad went looking for him, and he found Johnny and a man talking under the bleachers as if they were hiding. The guy, it turned out, was a cop. Johnny said he only followed the man under the bleachers because he was a policeman. After the game, Johnny pointed out the cop to his mom. She got a good look at him. This just didn't feel right, so Mrs. Gosh went to the school and got a list of police security who'd worked there. She took it to the station and talked to the chief. The chief showed her photos of the officers, and Mrs. Gosh said none of these guys were the man that she'd seen at the game. She said there must have been other cops, and sure enough, when she demanded to see more photos, another officer appeared with new faces. "That's him," she said, pointing at a man's face. "That's the man who took my son under the bleachers." But that was it. Nothing had came of it. She was told it had nothing to do with her son's disappearance. She asked the chief if she could at least chat with the cop who'd spoken to her son and ask him what he wanted with him. The chief said it wasn't possible. Many years later, in 2023, the West Des Moines Police Department still wouldn't release its files on Johnny's disappearance, since the case is ongoing. If the cop who'd spoken to Johnny were under investigation, the public wouldn't know. In a statement to a journalist in 2023, the department said, "The case will remain open, and we won't stop investigating until we have closure and answers as to what happened to Johnny Gosch." Mrs. Gosch has always believed something evil was afoot. Over the years, she never gave up on the case, hiring her own private investigators since she never fully trusted the Des Moines cops. In 1984, another paperboy vanished from the streets of Des Moines. He was young Eugene Martin, who vanished on August 12th of that year while, like Johnny, had been delivering the Des Moines Register. On March 29, 1986, a third boy went missing. He was 13-year-old Mark James Warren Allen, who left his house on Emma Avenue in Des Moines to visit a friend and never returned. He told his mother he was going to a friend's house. The media reported this as the third paperboy vanishing. It was later reported that Allen wasn't actually a paperboy, but it seems he was. He just wasn't on his route that day he went missing. A criminologist would look at these cases and quickly draw some comparisons. All three were white kids about the same age. They went missing in similar circumstances, not far from exactly 2 years after each other in a similar area. You could say there was a pattern, not least because none of the boys has ever been found dead or alive. Well, in the case of Johnny, it's more complicated. 6 months after Johnny went missing, Mrs. Gosch was told that a woman in Oklahoma had reported seeing a boy on a street corner. She said the boy was out of breath as if he'd just been running and told her, "My name is John David Gosch." She said 2 men grabbed him and took him away. The FBI has since refused to comment on the matter to the media, but Mrs. Gosch's private investigators spoke to the woman and later said, "We and the FBI checked it out, and we're both convinced it positively was Johnny." Yeah, this is strange, but the story is about to get much, much stranger. On February 22, 1984, Mrs. Gosch said her phone rang. She picked it up, and in a slurred voice, someone said, "Mom." The phone then went dead. She said it sounded like her son. She said the phone rang again, and she thought it was Johnny. It could have been hoaxers, of course. Kids can be cruel, adults can be weird, but a parent should understand what her own son's voice sounds like. Mrs. Gosch said she loved him, and the line went dead. Police told her they couldn't trace the calls. As if this case couldn't get any darker, in 1991, Mrs. Gosch was contacted by a private investigator in Nebraska. The man who worked with prisoners who'd been convicted of various kinds of harm against young people told her one of his clients had admitted to being involved in Johnny's kidnapping. Mrs. Gosch and the investigator Roy Stevens played the tape recordings he made of the prisoner's admission. The prisoner, Paul Bonacci, had once been a victim himself of an abduction. He said that when he was 15, he was with another young guy and an adult when the boys were told they'd be taking a road trip to Des Moines. They stayed in a hotel there when another man entered the room with a bag full of photographs. Among the collection of boys was a photo of Johnny. One of the men said Bonacci pointed to Gosch and said, "This is the one." The plan, Bonacci said, was for one of the men to talk to Johnny and for another to grab him. Since Bonacci and another kid were still teenagers and would be in the car, Johnny would likely not feel threatened. This was the lure. The other man would then scoop Johnny up from the street, and together they'd all drive away. Bonacci said they put a chloroform-soaked rag over Johnny's face, incapacitated him, and they drove off. Bonacci explained they drove to Sioux City, where they stayed in another hotel. In his own words, he explained, "And they left me, Mike, and Johnny in a room that had no windows on it." He said they locked the room from the outside. Bonacci said these men were professional kidnappers of children who sold the kids to other men who shared a particular monstrousness. He said he saw Johnny again a few months later. He was a prisoner at a man's house he only knew as the Colonel. He owned a ranch where he had a place under the floorboards to lock in the kids. When interviewed, Bonacci knew about a birthmark on Johnny's chest and scars on his body that had not been made public knowledge. Was Bonacci telling the truth? It's hard to say. It's also hard to say if he was telling the truth about having another personality that had been given to him by CIA agents. Yes, this story is wild. This other character, whom Bonacci called West Lee, claims that he was part of a secret government program, a CIA mind control deal in which kids mind controlled were used for various nefarious reasons. This could be for espionage, assassination, or setting up government officials or businessmen who were partial to having young associates. Bonacci, under his West personality, said this program was called Monarch. Far be it from us to say this couldn't possibly be true. We've researched CIA programs such as MKUltra, and once you've been down such rabbit holes, your trust in government tends to wane somewhat. The CIA trying to compromise powerful people is not out of the realm of possibility. The Republican politician, Senator John DeCamp, believed it was true. He believed in a ring of nefarious adults involved with U.S. intelligence. Even so, young folks who've testified to such heinous acts were later convicted of perjury. Freedom of Information Act requests from journalists have never revealed Monarch as a reality. CIA operatives involving such kids and rings of child kidnappers have never to this day been proven in a court of law. This doesn't mean Johnny wasn't taken by a group of very bad men. In March 1997, Mrs. Gosh said at about 2:30 a.m. there was a knock at her apartment door. When she answered the door, she saw a man about 27 years old. This man, she said, was Johnny. He was with an older man. Johnny, she said, showed her his birthmark on his chest. Mrs. Gosh later said, "We talked about an hour or an hour and a half. Johnny would look over to the other person for approval to speak. He didn't say where he was living or where he was going." She said Johnny told her he'd been kidnapped and then lost consciousness. He said he woke up and there was another kid, you guessed it, Paul Bonacci. She said Johnny told her he'd been moved around the USA and what he said were the efforts of his captors to compromise various politicians and businessmen. He hugged her and told her his life and her life were at risk because of this meeting. He said he could take care of himself and he left. To this day, Mrs. Gosh believes that Johnny was taken for this compromising program. In 2023, Bonacci told a journalist that he'd seen Johnny 15 to 20 times over the years. He says Johnny is grown up now with kids of his own. He says Johnny stays in hiding, fearing that powerful people will destroy his life if he tells the truth. It's hard to tell in this story if people have been deliberately misleading Mrs. Gosh at times. It's hard to know if she's been brought into the conspiracy theories a little too willingly. It's a very confusing case, and while it may include some outlandish theories, some of the evidence to support Mrs. Gosh's contentions is compelling. Investigators have admitted that. She's had bills passed to ensure police investigate missing kids faster than 72 hours, which admittedly could have saved her own son. But if Johnny was part of a ring, a victim of a network of warped minds, well, that's something we can only speculate over. A different class: Patrick Warren and David Spencer. Now let's talk about the UK. Over there, they used to have their own milk carton kids. Two of them were Patrick, Patty Warren, and David Spencer, a couple of working-class lads of 11 and 13 respectively, who went missing the day after Christmas Day back in 1996. Both the boys came from what the British would call a rough area. The kids certainly knew what hardship was. Despite their young age, they often walked around their council estate at night, which Americans might call the projects, smoking and causing trouble. This hood of theirs used to be a slum back at the start of the 20th century. On the day they went missing, what the Brits call Boxing Day, Patrick had been playing on his new bicycle, a Christmas present. David was running around with him. A cop saw them playing on a barely frozen pond, so he told them to get off. The boys got home around midnight. They told their parents they wanted to stay at Patrick's brother's house, which was not far away. The parents assented, but of course the boys decided to stay out a bit longer before going to see the brother. They were seen at a gas station where a man working as an attendant charitably gave them some biscuits, cookies. The man said the boys went off toward the shopping center. The time was 45 minutes after midnight. The boys, described as friendly lads but certainly not angels, didn't make it to wherever they were going. Patty's bike was soon found at the gas station near the trash area, but police didn't immediately raise any kind of alarm, even though Patty would almost certainly not have dumped his brand new Christmas gift. These were tough little kids, but not tough enough to be out after midnight in an area known for violence, addiction, and property crime. David could fight. He was a trained boxer, but still just a kid. He was expelled from school at the age of 12 and was still out of school when he went missing. His mother said he often took the law into his own hands and used force when he thought someone deserved it. He was known for his unpredictability and streetwise talents. The police like to tell this story, with the theme not about their childish vulnerability, but about how much they knew the streets. Uniformed police started knocking on doors, but reportedly not as a matter of urgency, given that the two boys were not known for adhering to norms for children their age. By late January, the police had changed their tune, and Patty and David began to have starring roles on the back of milk cartons. There's been a lot of criticism since, given the cops were not overly concerned for quite some time. The British public asked if two kids from a well-to-do family or a wealthy family had gone missing, would the police have been so slow to take the case seriously? It took months for the case to be viewed as a possible abduction or murder. The boys had vanished. Police are now sure that something very sinister happened to them. There can be no doubt about it. They came from an area of urban decay. It's not as if they could have starved in the forest or been eaten by wild hedgehogs. They were almost certainly murdered, or they remain imprisoned till today. Police did later have a suspect, a man who kidnapped kids in the past, but nothing came of it, and the man died in prison. It's also strange that if this man did do it, how had no one seen him? In areas of British decay, people live on top of each other. Even in the mid-90s, there was a lot of CCTV around. The poor little rascals may forever remain hidden, which in statistical terms is very unusual. As we said earlier, people rarely just vanish without a trace. The bad news is, according to the National Crime Agency, when kids are abducted and killed, the killing almost always happens within the first 6 hours. Even if police had been able to or willing to launch a serious investigation immediately, the two boys would have likely been dead before the perpetrator was found. Nowadays in England, the Criminal Investigation Department, or CID detectives, get involved with missing kids within 24 hours and take the case seriously regardless of whether the kids are poor or streetwise. In 1996, the CID had only gotten involved when Patty and David went missing after 3 long months. Even though there have been improvements, there's still a feeling in the UK that the police treat poor people very differently from how they treat kids from more affluent families. The BBC journalist went to Patty's family home in 2015. Patty's older brother answered the door, and someone screamed from inside, "No, don't talk to them." The brother turned around and said to another family member, "They want to talk about Patty." "Not interested," the man said without even looking up. When asked to say anything about the case, the first man turned to the journalist and said, "It was a bleeping joke," then slammed the door shut on the journalist's face. Could the same be said about America? Are rich and poor missing people treated differently by the police? The answer to that might be found in our next case. The Girl Next Door, Suzanne Lyle. Suzanne Lyle was a young woman with seemingly everything to look forward to. Unlike our last two victims, Suzanne came from an area known for its beauty, spas, and wealthy families. This was Ballston Spa, New York, which starkly contrasts England's gloomy and forbidding council estates. The average annual household income in Ballston Spa is $93,181. In Kelmsley Wood, where the boys came from, where there is high unemployment, it's £29,200 or $37,181 for a household. Suzanne was known as the darling of the 3 children of her family. From a young age, she showed maturity and high intelligence, excelling at school. She was also known to write poetry and build computers from scratch. She left high school as an honor student and found her first computer course at a university not challenging enough. She then later switched colleges, moving to the State University of New York at Albany, where her boyfriend, a fellow computer nerd, also studied. Suzanne held down 2 part-time jobs to fund her time as a student. She barely ever didn't call her loving parents every single day. She sent regular emails. She was a careful, responsible, and studious girl. Unlike our previous victims, she was not the kind of person who would risk walking around sketchy areas late at night. On March 1, 1998, she called her mom. She explained that she was low on cash since she was waiting for a paycheck. Her mom, Mary, offered to send her some money, but predictably Suzanne refused. She could hold out, she said. On March 2nd, she attended class at Albany, and at about 4 p.m. she started getting ready for work. This was her job at Babbage's, a computer software company, where she was already impressing people with her considerable computer acumen. This was 1998, when most teenagers didn't know the first thing about how operating systems worked or how data was stored. At work, as usual, she chatted with her older boyfriend, Richard, who set up her computer so he could remotely access it. At 9:30, she left Babbage's and boarded a bus that would take her to Albany campus Collins Circle stop next to her dorm room. One of her classmates, who was sitting at the same bus stop, said she saw Susie disembark. She later said she was 100% sure it was Suzanne. It was a 3 to 5 minute walk from the bus stop to Suzanne's room, depending on whether you marched or dawdled. In those few minutes, Suzanne disappeared off the face of the planet. Richard tried to call her that night but got no answer, so he called her parents in the morning. The parents called the university and told the campus police about what had happened. Suzanne was a very responsible girl. Even so, she was 19, and 19-year-olds spending the night out, say with a friend or a boy, was hardly unusual. Still, the parents had the foresight to call the bank where Suzanne had a credit card. Her card had been used that day at an ATM next to a convenience store. Unfortunately, no surveillance camera covered the area. The person had entered the correct number only to draw out $20, which was a small amount of money if someone had taken a card. Still, Suzanne's parents, who had some control over her money, said Suzanne always used to draw out $20 at a time. Richard later told the cops he knew the number for that card, but he was sure no one but he and Suzanne would have known it. Everything changes here in terms of comparisons to the David and Patty case. Instead of being ignored by investigators outside of a few friendly door calls, the New York State Police senior investigator John Camp got on the case. Suzanne, according to her father Doug, would never ever go somewhere and not tell anyone. He later said Susie was not a risk taker. She didn't party or use alcohol or drugs. A police officer had already looked for her around the university. He went to her classes to see if she turned up. He interviewed her friends who stayed in the same building. They all said she didn't come home that night. They said they always heard her keys rattle when she got home from work. Detective Camp soon discovered that an African male had used the ATM machine that night at the same time Suzanne's card was used. The man was subsequently interviewed by police. They let him go, but that didn't rule out that he could have been involved. In the first 2 weeks after Suzanne vanished, detectives investigated 270 leads and searched 300 acres of land near her apartment. Her story soon made national headlines. A detective told a newspaper, "It's a tough case. We have no physical evidence." The same article said Suzanne's parents were putting up a $15,000 reward for information that might lead to Suzanne being found. Her parents soon had to install an extra phone line because they were getting so many calls from the media and members of the public trying to help out. Her family also made a tearful plea for help on TV. Investigators said they were reminded of the 1985 case in which a 22-year-old girl, Karen Wilson, also went missing after getting off a bus and heading to her dorm room. Wilson was a full-time senior at the same university as Suzanne attended. She was also last seen in the month of March. Such synchronicity and comparisons can sometimes be important, as serial killers have been known to attack women of similar appearance, employing a similar modus operandi. Despite the attention the Suzanne Lyle case received, despite investigators trying their best to look for suspects and clues among the 16,000 students studying at Suzanne's university, cops didn't have much to go on. We rehashed a lot of old leads, but right now there are no glaring similarities that lead us to believe it's the same perpetrator, said State Police investigator James Horton on March 16th. Given the university was home to so many people, it seemed highly unlikely anyone would have been able to take Suzanne away without being seen. Detectives scoured the area near the dorm many times. Her body, it seemed, had not been dumped in the vicinity. Almost everyone in the area was now asked if they'd seen this girl, 5 foot 3 inches, 165 to 175 pounds, with long reddish-brown hair and blue eyes, last seen wearing a long black trench coat, a pair of blue jeans, and a black shirt. No one had. This was another strange case of vanishing. Doug passed away in 2015, but when he was alive, he never gave up hope of finding his daughter. Even today, Suzanne's mom is still looking for her. As with most missing people stories, there could be something police have missed. Suzanne's mom, and the police for that matter, have never totally discounted the possibility of Richard being involved. After all, he was the only person besides Suzanne that knew her ATM number. Still, given his obvious intelligence, he would have likely not used her bank card. But Mary was always concerned about her daughter's relationship with this man. She once told the press there were numerous times that Susie tried to break up with him, and he would get emotional, so she would stay. After Suzanne vanished, Richard told detectives that he and Susie were actually engaged. Mary said that was the first she'd heard about it, and Suzanne was not the type of girl to lie. Well, parents often think that. Whether it's true is another matter. Mary had every right to feel suspicious. Richard stopped cooperating with the police right after the disappearance. He'd only talked to them with his lawyer present, and he refused to take a polygraph. Mary also suspected that just before the disappearance, her daughter might have given Richard a breakup note, which Suzanne had said was a Valentine's Day card. It should be said that Richard always had an alibi for the night, with a friend telling police that they had been together playing video games. It was frustrating for the police. Just a few months after Suzanne was last seen, her Babbage's name tag was found on the ground about 90 feet away from the bus stop, in a parking lot, but in the opposite direction where she should have been walking home. Had someone dragged her there? Police couldn't find any other clues. Then there was Suzanne's colleague at Babbage's, who said just before Suzanne went missing, she'd told her that someone had been stalking her. The woman said Suzanne had not appeared afraid. In 2005, New York police arrested John Regan, who was facing a trial for a 1993 kidnapping in Connecticut. He tried to abduct a young student at Saratoga Springs High School, which wasn't far from where Suzanne had gone missing. Regan refused to talk to the police about Suzanne's disappearance. The case remains open. Given that Suzanne has been described as wholesome, it's a case that still makes news in various TV shows to this day. Suzanne's mom has also kept the case alive. She founded the Center for Hope to support families who've experienced the hell she's lived through for over 2 decades. President George W. Bush signed Suzanne's law as a part of the PROTECT Act of 2003, and later he signed the Suzanne Lyle Campus Safety Act into law, which should increase safety for people on college campuses. Another Suzanne law is still waiting to be voted in by the state assembly. This would make the penalties stiffer for crimes that happen on campus. The missing diplomat, Bradford Bishop. He was a diplomat, but he might also have doubled as a spy. He might have been a lot of things, and as he led his double life, he might have also been seen a few times. Bradford Bishop is an American enigma, a Yale graduate who went on to roll with the U.S. government movers and shakers. Mr. Bishop stood accused of taking a hammer to his entire family, bludgeoning to death his wife, 38, his own mother, 67, and his 3 sons, 5, 10, and 14, at the family home in Carderock Springs neighborhood of Bethesda, a short drive from D.C. where Bishop was working at the time in the State Department. The year was 1976. No one had seen it coming. The Bishops, once a popular young football player and a pretty cheerleader, seemed madly in love. They were, to all who knew them, a stable, loving family, and yet someone had gone wild with a heavy hammer on 4 people's heads and bodies. The police discovered the empty house painted in the family's blood. There had been no attempt to clean up the crime scene. Hair, bones, and flesh could be found in the carpets. The detectives on the case had never seen anything like it. This was clearly the work of a maniac. Bishop was fluent in Italian, French, Spanish, and Serbo-Croatian. Such skills took him to various countries in Europe and Africa, where he worked as a diplomat. It's unknown if he doubled as a spy like many American diplomats during the Cold War. This was the darkest era in the CIA's history, when the agency was pulling political strings and planning assassinations all over the world. You'll see soon why some investigators say Bishop's possible ties to the CIA are important. Police found the bodies smoldering on a fire about 200 miles away in eastern North Carolina. Forensic evidence suggests the wife was murdered first, followed by the kids, and last the mother, whom he bludgeoned when she got home from walking the dog. The murder weapon was a blunt instrument, almost certainly a hammer. Bishop owned a gun, a Smith & Wesson .38 revolver. He hunted and he hiked, so he may have also owned a rifle. We also know he owned a shotgun, yet if he killed his own family, those little kids, he'd chosen to do it in a way that would be up close and personal and possibly slow. Everyone knew he loved his children, so why engage in such awful brutality? On March 18th, Bishop's station wagon was discovered at an isolated compound in Elkmont, Tennessee. He'd left dog biscuits in the car. He'd also left a shotgun, an axe, a bloody blanket, and a shaving kit containing his medication. If you want to speculate, and people later would speculate, this was the era of MKUltra, when the CIA experimented on humans in their effort to try to control minds and, in some cases, reportedly to make people kill targets. Bishop just vanished in the air like a puff of smoke. It's known he could fly planes. It's also known that given his diplomatic work and the fact that he'd spent time working with counterintelligence, he was probably more than able to forge travel documents. He also had experience as an outdoorsman. But there's much more to this story than meets the eye. Just before the murders took place, Bishop had been corresponding with a prison inmate, Albert Kenneth Bankston. Bankston was at the United States Penitentiary in Marion, Illinois, for a 1970 armed robbery of the Citizens National Bank in Plain, Mississippi. Why was a diplomat writing to a convict? By the time the letter was found, Bankston had been dead from cancer 10 years already. It took the authorities all that time to investigate this connection. The media reported in 2015 the failure to find the letter, coupled with other evidence that was misplaced, suggests that the initial investigation was somewhat slipshod. It's also notable that Bishop wasn't put on the FBI's most wanted list for 38 years, yet he committed a far more heinous crime than most people on that list. It's hard to know what exactly Bishop and Bankston were talking about in the letter, but it mentioned a woman, and Bankston seemed to be asking Bishop to help him get to Mexico or Central America. A man named David Paul Allen was mentioned in the letter. Detectives from Montgomery County containing Bethesda discovered that Bishop might have wanted to pay this man to murder his family. He was supposed to be in Europe when it happened. The detective Robert Kiefer later said, when he started investigating the murders years after they happened, the FBI file an agent had written on Bankston mysteriously had gone missing. We tried to locate this agent, but nobody could tell us this guy even existed, Kiefer told the media. Then on March 19, 2000, Lorraine Kopacki of Asheboro bought an old diary for $38 at a flea market in North Carolina's Greensboro Coliseum. On the front, it was written Bradford Bishop Diary. The woman's son looked up that name on the internet, and soon they were fascinated by what they had on their hands. Who knows if it was the real Bradford Bishop, but it sure sounded like him. Here are some passages. February 1967. If you're going to succeed in the Foreign Service, make ambassador before you're 50. Hold positions of responsibility and constantly dedicate yourself and make considerable sacrifices of time and thought. Also, February 1967, toxic degenerative psychosis, low-level maniac, involutional megalomania. June 12, 1968. One should seize upon life and embellish it. Also in 1968, this accursed insomnia. It's amazing. Despite how lousy you feel, all doped up, smoking a few cigarettes, etc. My, such symbols, promotions, citations, languages, degrees. Still, you stand on the threshold. You have soared to the heights and plummeted, each time to the depths. Raymond M. Kite, sheriff of Montgomery County, spent much of his life on the Bishop case. Like the investigators that had come before him, he couldn't find a motive for the killings if Bishop really had committed them. He also knew that the initial investigations into Bishop's disappearance and murders were somewhat lacking. From a young cop to an old detective, Kite followed every lead over the decades and came up empty-handed each time. There were sightings of Bishop in Spain, Italy, Sweden, Africa, Greece, England, Finland, Belgium, Russia, and Switzerland. Kite once told a journalist that the Bishop case is so weird, he wouldn't be surprised if it were somehow related to the CIA's MKUltra experiments. Kite said, "I'm not so sure this didn't happen to Bishop. How else," he said, "do you go into your house and bludgeon your wife, children, and mother?" Kite explained that his investigation definitely revealed Bishop's covert CIA connections. Kite found out the CIA had done a damage assessment on Bishop about what he knew about the agency's covert activities. The report concluded that it does not consider Bishop as a possible espionage target. Without a doubt, the CIA and Bishop were much more connected than the CIA was admitting. Given the aforementioned report and the fact that many diplomats spied for the U.S. during the Cold War, Bishop might well have known something about the CIA's covert activities, including regime change and assassination. If Bishop is alive today, he'll be 88. We have a feeling he could still be out there. Was he a murderous maniac or was he set up? Well, that's not something we can answer. November 22, 1963. A warm, sunny day in Dallas, Texas. Multiple shots ring out. Moments later, the President of the United States is dead. 2 days later, the man responsible was also dead. The man who killed him, Jack Ruby, descended into an unfathomable mental illness and himself died not too long after. And as you'll see today, many other people connected in some way with the JFK assassination quickly bit the dust. Number 6. So what really happened to Jack Ruby? So what happened to Jack Ruby? How come he lost his mind after he killed Oswald? One man who'd done a lot of research on this topic and a lot of research into the Manson murders isn't quite sure, but does say some things look out of the ordinary. His name is Tom O'Neill, and he just had a book come out after researching the Manson murders for over 20 years. In a podcast, he said this about Ruby's meeting with Louis Jolyon Jolly West, a man that for a long time denied he was working with the CIA on mind control program MKUltra. O'Neill said, "My most important finding is that a CIA contracted agent or researcher for mind control became that witness's doctor right before he testified and told his story, and then he goes crazy. The problem is no one who worked in MKUltra will talk about it. It would have remained a complete secret had the CIA got away with destroying all related files." We know that just before Ruby was to testify to the Warren Commission, West visited him in his jail cell. No other people were present. West said Ruby had gone mad and was a paranoid, rambling mess of a man. We must remember here that prior to this, when West wrote to the CIA's mind control master, Sidney Gottlieb, he said his specialty was inducing insanity in people without their awareness. We know that after Ruby shot Oswald, some strange things happened. The police pinned him to the floor, and out of his mouth came these words, "What am I doing here? What are you guys jumping on me for?" It was as if he wasn't in control of himself. A psychiatrist later said that Ruby had suffered from a fugue state with subsequent amnesia. A fugue state is characterized by someone who suddenly loses their sense of themselves, having a kind of breakdown where they don't know what they're doing. Remember, no one had any idea that West had been working with the CIA on mind control. West tried very hard to get involved with Ruby, at one time asking Judge Joe B. Brown to appoint him on the case. According to documents that were found by Tom O'Neill a long time after the trial, West had been asked by someone to work on the case, but he never said who. At first, the judge refused to give West access to Ruby, but with some effort, West insinuated himself in the case. It was thought that perhaps West, with all the skills he had, could help Ruby recall the day he shot Oswald. On April 26, 1964, West boarded a plane and went to see Ruby. Not long after, West came out of Ruby's cell and stated the man had a complete psychotic break. West said that Ruby was positively insane. No one knows and will likely never know what happened in that cell. In a sworn affidavit, West wrote that Ruby was hearing things and seeing things, going as far as to hide under his table because he thought all the Jews in the U.S. would be slaughtered. West said that Ruby said he'd seen his brother tortured, horribly mutilated, castrated, and burned in the street outside the jail. West wrote that Ruby could still hear the screams of Jewish children being boiled alive. It sounded like a really bad trip. After that, any other doctor that met with Ruby came to the same conclusion. He had suddenly gone mad. Still, doctors who talked with Ruby before West had seen him had said he was absolutely fine, not crazy at all. West wrote, "Tonight, my own findings make it clear that there has been an acute change in the patient's condition since these earlier studies were carried out." A doctor that had seen Ruby before and after he had met with West was astounded by the change. His name was Dr. William Beavers, and he wrote that there was a possibility that someone had done something to Ruby, perhaps given him some sort of very powerful drug. He wrote the possibility of toxic psychosis could be entertained, but is considered unlikely because of the protected situation. Obviously, Beavers could not have had an inkling that West was involved in a project that forced powerful drugs on unwitting victims and tried to mess with their minds. A good point is, what if he had known about West's involvement with the CIA's dark program? He probably would have looked into the matter further. What's even stranger is the fact that Ruby was visited by Dr. Werner Tudor in 1965. He made an evaluation and sent the notes to West so they could be submitted to court. West looked at the documents and he erased one part. It said, "There is considerable guilt about the fact he sent guns to Cuba." Why did West expunge that line? Did he have anything to do with Ruby's breakdown? We don't know. There is a possibility that there is more to the story than we already know. After all, the CIA wasn't exactly forthcoming about its mind control efforts. Now, listen to how 3 men all walked into a room one day, and not long after, were all dead. Number 5. Enter at your own risk. The journalist Bill Hunter received some acclaim for writing 3 Days in Dallas after the JFK assassination. He also wrote about Ruby shooting Oswald. He was one of the few people that actually got permission to have a look around Ruby's apartment right after he shot Oswald. In April 1964, Hunter was sitting at a desk in Long Beach Police HQ and he was shot. The gun of a policeman named Crichton Wiggins had apparently accidentally gone off, and a bullet had entered the chest of Hunter, killing him instantly. The officer said he had dropped the gun. Investigators soon found out that there was no way that Wiggins was telling the truth. He admitted that he hadn't dropped the gun at all, but had been playing around with it when it accidentally fired. It's believed Hunter was still working on the case, and that's why his death is seen as suspicious by some of the JFK conspiracy fraternity. Ruby had been living with a man named George Senator. We've seen the court transcripts, so this is very much a fact. Senator said this in a court about Ruby. He was a good, sound American citizen, and politics, he never messed around with that. He never messed around politically at all. The majority was connected with the music industry, the nightlife, his club, his competitors, what they were doing. It was because of Senator that Hunter was allowed into Ruby's room. Also allowed inside was Dallas Times-Herald journalist Jim Cothey and Ruby's attorney Tom Howard. On the 21st of September 1964, while writing a book on the assassination, Cothey mysteriously died. Some sources say that he had been karate chopped to the neck, but other sources say that he was strangled. No one knows what happened, although Time magazine in 1966 attempted to dampen the flames of conspiracy by saying the journalist was well known for hanging out with thugs. Time said police at the time said the motive was somehow connected to homosexuality, but didn't expand on that. We found a news clipping from back then with the headline, "Newsman's Death Termed Murder." The police captain said this in the report. He could have been killed by a karate blow to the neck or have fallen and struck his neck on a table or a bedstand in the room where his body was found. The apartment had been ransacked, and there were signs of a struggle. Police in the end said it was a burglary that had gone wrong, although people have said it had something to do with the notes the journalist had written about the assassination or what he knew about Ruby. 1 year later, Howard also died. His death was ruled a heart attack, although as people are quick to point out, there was never an autopsy. Still, the New York Times wrote that he had died of a massive coronary infection, stating, "Mr. Howard had been ill for several days but continued his law practice. He was just 48. As you'll now see, not only men tied to the case died. Number 4. Was this woman really going to crack the case? One journalist actually got to chat with Ruby, and her name was Dorothy Kilgolphin. She was not so sure about the conclusions that the Warren Commission came up with, and she let it be known. She also published some of the commission's findings before they were officially released to the public. What happened to her? On November 8, 1965, she was found dead in her apartment in Manhattan. Prior to that, she had written that the CIA and the Mafia had worked together. Some people have also said that she was a CIA asset. After the assassination, she reportedly told her friends that she was going to crack the case. She said to one person, "In 5 more days, I'm going to bust this case wide open." By all accounts, she had given the first draft of her book to Florence Smith, her friend, and the wife of the ambassador to Cuba. When Kilgoffin's body was found, it was determined that she had died from an overdose of booze and barbiturates. According to some sources, she was found in a room she didn't go in often. She had a book in her lap that she'd already finished, and her reading glasses, which she couldn't read without, were in another room. As for Florence Smith, did she have those notes? No, is the answer. She died one day after Kilgoffin of a cerebral hemorrhage. She was 45. No book or notes were found. Still, she had reportedly been ill for some time and had only just gotten out of the hospital. There is evidence that Smith was friends with JFK and Mrs. Kennedy, and it's never been revealed where the New York Times got the information from about her illness and stay in the hospital. That's just what the paper wrote in her obituary. The next one has had conspiracy theorists talking for years, but they might have been seeing things that just weren't there. Number 3. The Benavides brothers. Then there were the brothers, Edward Benavides and Domingo Benavides. Domingo was one of the witnesses who saw police officer J.D. Tippit get shot after the assassination. Some sources say he testified that the shooter looked nothing like Oswald, but from what we can see, he just gave a vague description that could have been a lot of people. Some sources say that a dark presence feared that he would blow the lid on something, so he needed to be taken out. But he wasn't killed. Instead, his brother, who looked like him, was shot in a tavern in Dallas. But, and this is important, the brother was shot after the Warren Commission had people testify in court. Conspiracy theorists have argued that he was shot during the investigation, but we've actually seen his death certificate. Indeed, he was murdered on February 16, 1965. This means he couldn't have been taken out accidentally by someone who wanted to kill his brother. It's just another death that you could say is the type of thing to start making lights go off in someone's head. Now let's look how one official thought that the CIA took out JFK. Number 2. The Insiders. Did a man who worked for the CIA have extensive knowledge about the assassination and know that his own team had done the job? The man was named Gary Underhill. According to some books, after the assassination, he said this to a friend: "You're going to Spain? That's the best thing to do. I've got to get out of the country too. This country is too dangerous for me now. I've got to get on a boat too. I'm really afraid for my life. Oswald is a patsy. They've set him up. It's too much. The bleeps have done something outrageous. They've killed the president." The CIA denied that this man worked for them. But then the CIA, it has to be said, has always been very sparing with the truth. It's a fact that Underhill worked in the military intelligence service, so he is a person of interest. It's also stated by credible sources that he did actually say those things after the assassination. Shortly after, he was found dead in his house. According to the District of Columbia Department of Public Health, his certificate of death dated May 8, 1964 read that he shot self in head with an automatic pistol. Some people have remarked that he had been shot behind the left ear, and the gun was discovered in his left hand. He was right-handed. But then, if he did kill himself, maybe he was an unorthodox kind of guy. Also, would CIA hitmen be that stupid? Now we turn to the FBI and an agent named Gary Bannister. This guy was a serious anti-communist who later went on to form his own private investigation agency. He was accused by one of his colleagues of knowing about the hit on JFK being an inside job. This guy told a lot of people about that, and he became a big part of the investigation. Bannister died soon after in 1964 from coronary thrombosis. He was 63. Number 1. The Lover. According to various mainstream sources, a woman named Mary Pinchot Meyer was a mistress of JFK and a friend of his wife. She was also a good buddy of the wife of a very high-ranking CIA guy. In 1964, she was murdered, and her death to this day remains a mystery. Her affair with the president had been a big secret, and so that information only came out later. As for her death, it was said the shooter must have had extensive training with a firearm. An African-American man named Ray Crump was charged with the murder, but when the case went to trial, he was acquitted. So why would someone have taken this woman out execution style? It's well known that she kept a diary, and in it were things that some people thought the world didn't need to know. After she was killed, people went in search of that diary. One of them was a CIA agent who was caught trying to break into her apartment, according to journalist Ben Bradley. But so what if the diary exposed the president? So what if he and his mistress smoked weed together in the White House? Did that really qualify for her execution? Well, some of the people believe that this woman knew too much, maybe more than has been let on, and that's why she had to go. It's also worth noting that after the Warren Commission came up with its report, she was very skeptical. Maybe that was one of the reasons why the agency was wiretapping her phone. This is all true, and you have to admit her death and the timing of it do sound quite suspicious. July 1954. Tokyo. The sun dances off the polished metal fuselages of the planes, lazily descending onto the tarmac. The air itself ripples from the heat. Inside passport control, a huge map of the world overhangs rows of desks. Takeya Maya fans himself with papers and tugs at the uniform clinging too tight around his neck. It's important to present oneself properly, particularly when you are the first point of contact many from the outside world will make with Japan. It's important to maintain an immaculate presentation to make a good impression, but he still wishes he could loosen his collar even for a moment. The flow of passengers seems to move even slower than the gradually descending planes outside. Open passport, check details, ask questions, stare the person down, ensure a good likeness with the photo, stamp, welcome to Tokyo, next person. Mr. Takei has sat in the same booth since the end of the war. At what point would he check his millionth passport? Had he done it already? He pulls himself back to reality. Stamping passports can become so monotonous, you stop checking them at all and just go through the motions. It's vital he doesn't do that. Foreign powers, spies, military officials, political opponents, anybody could pass in front of him at any moment. He has to stay vigilant. But this woman in front of him is no spy, just a housewife from Korea. Welcome to Tokyo. Next, a white man steps forward, well-dressed in a suit with a short beard, likely American. Here for business, there's been an uptick of them since the end of the war. The man smiles at Mr. Takei and hands over his passport before returning his hands casually to his pockets. Mr. Takei studies the passport. Name: John Allen Kuchar Zergas. Strange-sounding name, perhaps he's not American after all. Date of birth looks about right. Photograph matches. Passport number looks legitimate. Do you speak much Japanese? Some. I've been studying hard to improve myself ahead of my visit. I prefer French. His Japanese was good, a bit stiff, but he could clearly hold a conversation. Mr. Takei flips through the pages of the passport. Plenty of stamps in here already. UK, Czechoslovakia, Germany, Ethiopia, Chile, US, South Korea, Thailand, Vietnam, United Arab Republic. Mr. Takei is not familiar with some of these stamps. There aren't many visitors to Japan from some of these countries. He studies each in detail. Very widely traveled. What do you do for work, sir, if you don't mind my asking? It wasn't a question, it was a command. I'm a businessman. Trade in plastics mostly. Are you here for business? Yes. It all seems to check out. Mr. Zergas was well-traveled, certainly, and that's always aroused suspicion, but his passport looks utterly genuine. There are no grounds for detaining him. If you will, sir, Mr. Zergas says. My wife has just gone through. May I go and join her? Mr. Takei comes out of his stupor and nods. He flips the passport closed and hands it across the desk. But when Mr. Zergas reaches out to take it, the Japanese man does not let it go. His eyes are fixed on the seal embossed on the front of the passport. Mr. Takei snatches it back and stares at Mr. Zergas with fierce suspicion. Is there a problem, sir? Mr. Zergas asks. Confusion and fear written across his face. Mr. Takei takes the passport and stares at the name of the country written on the front. Taured. He flips the document around and points at the country name on it. Mr. Zergas looks puzzled. Taured, yes, that's where I'm from. Mr. Takei tries to explain as politely but directly as possible that there is no such country as Taured. Mr. Zergas laughs in surprise. Why, of course there is. He points a hand to the map up above them, to southern Europe. It's right there. Sir, that is Spain. No, not Spain, above it, sandwiched between Spain and France. Andorra. No, Taured. Mr. Zergas is getting increasingly exasperated. His raised voice draws the eyes of fellow passengers and security guards alike. Mr. Takei quietly presses the silent alarm button under his desk. My country has a long, rich history. We've existed for over 1,000 years. We're a European superpower. A pair of guards appear at his shoulders and wrap their arms through his, hauling him away. What's going on? How do you not know of Taured? He starts speaking in French, shouting at the guards and appealing to all his fellow passengers until he disappears behind a pair of doors. As the atrium falls silent once again, Mr. Takei takes a deep sigh. Next, please. But as the Kyoto businessman shuffles forward, Mr. Takei can't help but glance up at the map. Taured. Atsuyuki Sasa rubs his temples as he steps into the hotel elevator. It's been a very long and very confusing day, all built on an utterly ridiculous lie. Working at the Tokyo Metropolitan Police Department Public Security Bureau, you would be shocked at the number of days wasted on chasing farcical leads around. This latest case had been no exception. Mr. Zergas has been taken to a hotel to be held under investigation. 2 guards stand ready outside his door day and night to make sure he doesn't escape. He's being kept in downtown Tokyo on the 13th floor of a hotel block. Mr. Atsuyuki had been dragged in to try to make sense of what to do with him. No matter how much he or anyone else tried to explain it to Mr. Zergas, the foreign man refuses to accept that he's from a country that does not exist. They had studied his passport over and over. It appears to be entirely legitimate, except for the glaring error that it's from a totally fictional nation. Why would a forger go to all this effort to expertly make a passport so convincing in every detail, only to make it such an obvious fake? Unless they were out of touch with European politics, perhaps. Mr. Atsuyuki had been on the phone all afternoon with the Japanese embassies in France, Spain, and Andorra, where each time they were met with more confusion at the mention of Taurid. My passport was issued at Tamanrasset, the capital of Taurid, south of the Sahara, John Zergas had explained as if talking to infant children. South of the Sahara? In Europe? What a ridiculous lie to tell with such fervor. The man was either insane or in way over his head with something. Or, Mr. Atsuyuki laughed to himself, he'd been reading too much science fiction. The other explanation that had popped into his head had almost been too ridiculous to even think about. But as he stepped out onto the carpeted hotel hallway, his imagination started to fill in the gaps on the only theory that would make sense. Except, of course, it was impossible. What if Mr. Zergas is actually from a parallel universe? What if somehow he got on a flight in one universe and touched down in another? A universe where his home country never existed, and now he was trapped here, confused and afraid. Mr. Atsuyuki laughs to himself again. The guard stationed by the door smile, asking what's so funny, but he brushes their questions aside. Just his imagination running away with itself. He unlocks the door and steps into the room. "Good evening, Mr. Zergas. I was wondering if you'd be able to answer some more." But the room is totally empty. The window is closed, the bathroom is open, no air vents, a perfect indent was left on the neatly made bed in precisely the shape of a person. Only there was no person left. When you get down to the subatomic level, the rules governing our universe start to break down. Logic, mathematics, time and space, cause and effect, the laws of physics. These are all things that we cling to tightly at our level of existence. Even the most spiritual, anti-scientific minds rely on these basic things to get through life. They are so fundamental to our existence that we simply cannot comprehend a world where their laws are even twisted, let alone broken. Take, for example, Werner Heisenberg's uncertainty principle. It's quite an apt name for how it makes you feel. Heisenberg posits that you can either know the position or the speed of a particle, but not both. This is ridiculous to our minds. Imagine you're meeting with a friend and you call them to ask how close they are. They tell you that they can either tell you precisely where they are or how quickly they're driving, but not both. If they so much as look at a street sign, then all of a sudden their speedometer will go haywire. Or if they look at the dash, Google Maps will uninstall itself. And yet, that appears to be how the quantum realm works. This is the idea that also underpins what is called superposition. A particle, until it is observed, does not have a fixed location. Like refusing to look at Google Maps on your phone, you could be absolutely anywhere. But it's a step further than that. Until you look at Google Maps, your car is somehow everywhere possible at the same time, both at home and in your friend's driveway, and all the way along the route between the two. To try to illustrate this mind-bending concept, Erwin Schrödinger created a very famous conceptual experiment. You place a cat in a box. The box is closed with no way of observing what's happening inside. Also in that box with the cat is a very small vial of a gaseous poison. This poison will be released when the radioactive substance in its trigger decays through a subatomic process. Since the cat's life is hinging on the position of a subatomic particle, and we cannot see in the box, the particle exists in a state of superposition. It's both released and unreleased at the same time, so the position is both triggered and contained. The cat is both alive and dead. Only when we open the box and look inside will the superposition end, and the cat will either look up at us in confusion or lie still. So what does this have to do with John Zergas? Schrödinger's cat is our glimpse into the possible reality of parallel universes. In that moment of superposition, as the cat is both alive and dead in the box, there are two realities coexisting with one another. Think of reality like a piece of string. As the cat is in the box, the string comes apart and separates into two threads, each previously joined but now apart. It's the same reality, the same string, but in that moment there are two versions of it coexisting. You open the box and one of the threads continues becoming the true reality, while the other withers away into a loose end. Except the universe doesn't work like this. Reality does not just stop existing. It's not that one of those two versions of reality was really true the whole time and we just couldn't tell which it was. They were both as true as each other. When you look at our world now, it doesn't just blink out of existence at a moment's notice. It doesn't just stop out of nowhere. So what's happening to the loose thread? What if it doesn't just disappear? What if that thread is still going, but it just separated off away from us? What if, while you opened that box and burst into tears at the sight of Mr. Tibbles lying dead because you played with poison, there's another version of you at the same time lifting their beloved cat out of the box and promising never to do that again? How would your lives diverge from that point? Whilst one of you is digging a little grave in your garden and answering some harsh but fair questions from your family, the other one of you is dressing Mr. Tibbles in a bow tie and raking in brand deals on TikTok. Now imagine every little moment of uncertainty in the world led to a moment like this. Anytime particles were in superposition and then forced to take one location or another, each one spawns another parallel thread. Universes coming off of universes. It's a concept we're all familiar with, from Marvel's escapades into the multiverse, to Rick and Morty leaping through portals all the way back to Plato and earlier, Heaven and Hell, Jannah and Jahannam, Valkyrie. We've always had a deep lying concept of another reality running parallel to our own. As much as it blows our minds to think about it, there is clearly something deep-rooted in us that's drawn to the idea. What we've always wanted to do is cross that line from one parallel universe to another. So, is it possible? There are a number of cases throughout history that tell that perhaps it could be. Let's take a look at 3 of them. First up, we have the Green Children of Woolpit, the oldest of our accounts of parallel universe travelers. This tale takes us back to England in the 12th century. One night in the town of Woolpit in Suffolk, a pair of scared and sickly children wandered into the common. One boy and one girl. Some locals rushed out to help them, but they were shocked at what they saw when they brought the children into the candlelit home. The children's skin was totally green. They wrapped blankets around the children and asked them where they'd come from. Who were their parents? Were they sick? But question after question, the children would not respond. They seemed to not understand the words that were being spoken to them. Try as the adults might, the children would just stare blankly at them. They couldn't speak English, and if this had been the streets of London where foreign trade was common and ships were arriving and departing all the time, it would be one thing. But they were deep into the countryside and far from any ports. Concerned at the children's apparent ill health, they offered them food: bread, potatoes, meat, stews, milk. But the children did not eat any of it. They looked at the food with the same confused expressions they'd worn as they were being spoken to. Despairing, the adults offered them everything in their pantry and eventually found something the little girl would eat: beans. But the boy would not take a bite. No matter what they tried to feed the boy, he simply refused, and within a few days, his sickness overcame him and he died. The girl, on the other hand, seemed to improve. The more she ate, the longer she stayed. The less green her skin became until she eventually looked no different than any other girl. She was baptized, and she steadily learned English. Once she was able to, she explained where she had come from. It was a place she called St. Martin's Land. There it was always dark. She and her brother had lived underground, as did everyone else, and everything there was green in color. They'd been out playing and discovered a cave. Walking through it, they found themselves in Woolpit, with no way of returning home. She went on to live the rest of her life in Woolpit, never quite understanding what had happened and always feeling rebellious and angry. Our next account comes from the 1800s and hinges around an important event in world history: the split between the US and the UK. In the 19th century, the eccentric British inventor William Cantello was working on his latest project, a gun that would reload itself and fire again instantly in rapid succession, like a machine in a factory, a machine gun. Thrilled with his prototype finally working in the 1880s, Cantello announced to his sons that he was taking the weapon to market and left his home in Southampton. Cantello was never seen again. But here's where a real mystery comes in. 20 years later, an American inventor by the name of Hiram Maxim came along with his own prototype. It's a machine gun just like the one Cantello invented, but that's not the strange part. This is: Henry Maxim looks identical to the missing William Cantello. So much so that Cantello's own sons could barely tell the difference between the two men. In his autobiography, released late in his life, Maxim recounts how he had spent years being plagued by a man impersonating him. Could it be that this mysterious coincidence could in fact point to something greater? That one of these two parallel inventors living parallel lives may have accidentally crossed from one universe to another? Well, that may be precisely what happened to this historical figure. For this one, we're going to go to 1851 in Frankfurt, Germany. Late at night, a pair of police officers spot a man wandering through the streets, looking scared and confused. Assuming he had a big night, officers approached him and tried to talk to him. Very quickly, they realized that he speaks almost no German. His name is Jopar Voren. The police have to speak very slowly and simply, using a lot of hand gestures to help him understand. Yet Voren seems to be totally present mentally. He tells them that he's from Lazaria. When they tell him they don't know the country, he tells them it's on the continent of Sakria. The man is not intoxicated or mentally unwell. He states these facts quite plainly, surprised that the men do not recognize the words he's saying. They get European officials to question the man and try to help him find his way home. Interviewer after interviewer tries language after language, but they cannot find a tongue that Vorin is comfortable with. Broken English is the closest they can get to his native language. He tells them he speaks Lazarian and Abramian fluently. Neither language exists. He explains calmly and confidently that Lazarian is spoken only by clerics. The police are even more confused. He's a Christian, he tells them. They ask what denomination. He says, Ipatian. Again, another answer that does not appear to be real. He tells them that he has come to Germany in search of a missing relative, but was shipwrecked on the way there. Since the shipwreck, everything's been so unfamiliar and strange. He wants to return to Sakria. He is afraid and confused. Soon after his interrogation, he disappears, never to be seen or heard from again. Which brings us back to our main story here, Mr. John Zarkis, the man from Taurid, who disappeared from his hotel room. The man with a perfectly real passport for a place that does not exist. The traveler from another parallel universe. Will we ever get to the bottom of what happened in Tokyo in 1954? Yes, and it starts with our first shocking twist of many. This did not happen in 1954 at all. It happened 5 years later, in 1959. The mysterious story, which had at first been local only to Japan, was picked up by international writers several years later who changed some of the key details. Jacques Bergier, a writer, journalist, chemical engineer, and a spy, what a resume, told a version of the story that altered some of the key details. In his version of the events, John Zargis claimed that Taurid was a nation that stretched from Mauritania to Sudan and included a large part of Algeria. This did not happen. Bergier also said that Zargis was locked up in a psychiatric institution where he revealed that he was in Tokyo to secretly buy arms for the true Arab Legion. As fantastical and exciting as this version of events is, it's not true. So, what is true? Well, Atsuyuki Sasa really did work on the case. He was a member of the TMPD Public Security Bureau and was tasked with investigating a man with a fake passport. Thankfully for us, Mr. Atsuyuki wrote a memoir. In it, he documents his encounters with John Zargis and the mystery surrounding the whole situation. Here is where we can find the truth. Was John Zargis really from another parallel universe? Or is the truth even more exciting? This is where we have to admit to some small deception on our own part. Upon entering the country, John Zargis had not been stopped by passport control at all. Modern accounts and urban legends tell that version of the tale, but it differs from the official records. In reality, in October 1959, not July 1954, John Zargis was able to enter the country freely along with his wife from Korea. The couple kept a low profile in the country for 3 months, with little known about their movements or activities. Suspicion came, as it always does, when money was involved. Mr. Zargis, in the new year in 1960, arrived at the Japanese office of Chase Manhattan Bank. Doing his best to look normal, he attempted to cash a 200,000 yen check, worth just over $500 at the time, and a second U.S. check for a further $140. Today, those values would be roughly 10 times as much due to inflation. He then had a check for another 100,000 yen that he tried to cash at the Japanese office of the Bank of Korea. A strange man with little documentation and reason for being in Japan, suddenly cashing foreign checks without explanation. Red flags were raised, an investigation was launched, and John Zargis was arrested on suspicion of identity fraud. The man in charge of the case was Atsuyuki Sasa. The TMPD Public Security Bureau reviewed his documentation, including his passport. He was widely traveled, with stamps in it from Japanese embassies all across East Asia. At first glance, it would look totally convincing, but when they actually started to study it in detail, it quickly became apparent that the passport was a fake. A good one, but a fake. Only 2 people have fake passports: spies and conmen. Atsuyuki's heartbeat quickened. Had they just caught an international spy trying to enter Japan's capital city? He sat down in the interrogation room with Zargis and grilled him. They had the fake passport, they had suspicious checks, they already had all they needed to prosecute him for his crimes. But there was a lingering question still in the air. Who was he? And before long, Zargis cracked. He spilled everything to Atsuyuki about his past and why he was there. He had been born in the US but moved around all through his childhood. First the UK, then Czechoslovakia, before ending up in Germany, where he went to high school. At the start of the war, however, he returned to the UK to fight for the Allies as a pilot in the Royal Air Force. In a fierce battle, his plane had been shot down, and he was captured and held by the Nazis until the end of the war. Finally free, he decided to escape the chaos of Europe and lived briefly in Latin America before getting involved with the Americans based in South Korea. They recruited him as a spy and sent him off to be a pilot in Thailand and Vietnam. Finally, he ended up in the United Arab Republic, where he was given the special mission that he was in the middle of at that very moment. He had been sent to Japan to recruit military volunteers from the inside to fight for the United Arab Republic. Finally, Zerkis stopped talking, and Atsuyuki sat back in his chair rubbing his temples. That had been such a barrage of information, he didn't know where to start. Some months later, a news story broke in a small Canadian newspaper under the title, "The Man with His Own Country." It told of a foreigner who had arrived on Japanese soil with a false passport. The man had claimed to be a naturalized Ethiopian and an intelligence agent for Colonel Nasser, and was carrying a passport issued at Tamanrasset, the capital of Taured, south of the Sahara. This story had changed a number of details from the case already, and contained in it one crucial spelling error, Taured. In reality, it should have read Tuareg, which is the name of an ethnic group or Berbers from the Saharan region. Tamanrasset is a real province in Algeria. From this news story, urban legends spring up. Taured, the unknown country, fictional account after fictional account, told through secondhand sources, layered levels and levels of mystery on top of the story, carrying it steadily further and further from reality of what actually happened. Whether Taured was a misspelling by the newspaper, a source they were interviewing, or a misspelling in the passport itself that tipped off its illegitimacy, who knows? What we do know is that there have been so many regurgitated accounts of the man from Taured that supernatural or science fiction explanations are required to make sense of what happened. So, what happened to John Zerkis? Did he really disappear from a hotel room, like the urban legends state? Atsuyuki Sasa worked hard to check all the facts that John Zerkis had presented to him in the interrogation room. From his birth in the US, through his membership in different militaries, work as a spy, and travels all across the world, Atsuyuki called embassy after embassy looking for verification that this man's story of his life was true. And phone call after phone call, he was met with disappointment. No, they had not heard of a John Zerkis. He did not show up in any of their official documents. The man was not an RAF pilot. The man was not a spy. Remember, there are only two people who carry a fake passport, spies and conmen. Atsuyuki had ruled one of those out definitively. All of the remaining evidence, the frequent lies, the delusions of grandeur, the travel, the suspicious checks, they all pointed to one thing. John Zerkis was nothing more than a con man. Now the only question remaining was what to do with him. But before we get to that, is traveling to another universe like Zerkis claimed to do in his misinterpreted story actually possible? The stories we covered in this video are all most likely urban legends. The story of the Woolpit children is either local folklore or a story passed through such a long game of telephone that it's lost all connection with reality. The story of William Costello and Hiram Maxim was likely just a coincidence. Jopar Vorin could have been mentally ill, concussed, or just playing a trick on the police. There are rational explanations to each account, but that doesn't scratch the itch. Could you actually travel to a parallel universe? In a way, you already are. Every second of every day, we're making decisions. These decisions created new branching pathways, each one springing off to a new parallel universe. Did you get a flat white or a cappuccino? Did you sit on the bus or stand? Every moment of our lives, we're traversing a multiverse. In a moment of decision, we're taking one path, while another version of yourself is taking another. So technically, we are taking all the paths. But that isn't very satisfying. We have no awareness of the other paths and can't see what's going on with that version of yourself that did decide to quit their job to pursue a career in parkour. Sadly, there's no easy solution that we can see as of yet that'll allow us to simply pop our heads through into a parallel universe and check out what's going on. Our brains and bodies just aren't built for that. But there is a lot more hope than you might think, because we already have access to the brains that can do that: quantum computers. A traditional computer at its most fundamental level works in binary. Everything is a 1 or a 0. Our computers, designed by our minds, work like we do. There's a set logic that's fixed and understandable to us. But quantum computers break those rules. Remember when we explained earlier in the video briefly how superposition works? Subatomic particles can occupy two states of being at once, both equally valid until our observation forces them to be one or the other. Build a computer around that principle and you end up with something very strange. A computer that doesn't see a 1 or a 0 but can see both at the same time. A simple string of binary code, like 00001, is made up of 5 bits. A bit is just the smallest possible measure of data a computer can have, a 1 or a 0. But with a quantum computer, you are suddenly not dealing with bits anymore, but with qubits. The simple bit suddenly explodes with complexity, as each digit can be either or both at the same time in a qubit. You can now conduct exponentially more calculations as they're all happening at the same time within the same line of binary. Does that make sense? It doesn't, does it? And that's why quantum computing could be our answer to seeing into parallel universes. It sounds like the stuff of science fiction, but quantum computers already exist. They are very difficult to operate and quite crude compared to where they'll end up in a few decades' time, but they are real and functional. To give you an illustration of how fast they can operate, Google conducted an experiment with their quantum computer in 2019. They gave it a calculation that would take the world's fastest conventional supercomputer over 10,000 years to work through. Their quantum computer had it solved in 200 seconds. This is a bit scary. Take the messages on your phone. They're probably encrypted end-to-end so that only you and the person you're messaging with can read them. Essentially, encryption in a nutshell is just a way of putting a really long hidden password on each message that would take a ridiculously long time to crack. A quantum computer would have no problem cracking it. But it's not just your WhatsApp messages that are encrypted. Banking data, nuclear launch codes, presidential correspondence, military plans. Our entire world is built on encryption. So how are these quantum computers so scary fast? By operating in these seemingly parallel worlds, the qubits within the quantum computer exist in superposition. They are both 1 and 0 at the same time. When we try to observe one or the other, the superposition collapses and we are locked into our timeline. A quantum computer does not have this issue. It runs its code in our timeline and in the other timeline at the same time. The reason it can be as fast as it is because it is literally existing and operating in multiple parallel universes all at once. So how can we use that? One disturbing science fiction idea that is creeping up closer and closer in the background of the AI races and neural link controversies is mind uploading, replacing your brain with a computer. Uploading your consciousness. What if slowly over time you replace the components of your brain with tiny computerized versions of them? You maintain your consciousness and sense of self the whole time. First, your hippocampus. You still feel like you, but now there's a computer that's picked up where the neurons left off. Then your hypothalamus. No change. Like the ship of Theseus, you replace one thing at a time until none of the original remains. Eventually, every part of your brain is now a tiny quantum computer. But you are still you, right? Now all those pesky neurons with their binary limitations and inability to perceive what could be beyond have been replaced. Qubits are the building blocks of your mind, and with them you can finally understand, finally see directly into a parallel universe. On the 10th of August 1960, 5 days after the rumor mill had already started spinning with the publication of the inaccurate news story in Canada, the Tokyo District Court sentenced John Zarghis to a year in prison for identity fraud. He was distraught and afraid. After a year in prison, he was deported to Hong Kong. His wife was deported to South Korea. And that's the last that the world heard about John Zarghis. But chillingly, it may not be the last time we hear about a person who has seen into a parallel universe.